Yeah, we're doing it?
No, yeah, sorry.
No,
Technical
no, it's cool. All right. I guess mic check. Do we do that first? So it's working? Okay. First. Okay. Evan, ask Evan, can you hear us? Or is the sound coming okay? Can you hear me now? Can you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Okay. Right. So yeah, Tim's got it on there. All right. Cool. All right. So we left off last time. Yeah. No, not Olivia. Maybe not right now. Just give us a sec. There's a wall of snacks. All right. So we left off last time talking. I'm sorry. Olivia walked up and was like, "Oh, I'm hungry," and it's like, no. So we left off last time talking about the election of Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln was pretty moderate on slavery. Remember, his attitude was that he didn't think the Republicans had the constitutional authority to ban slavery in the states where it already existed, but he did think that they could ban slavery in the federally governed territories west of the Mississippi River, in the former Louisiana Purchase territory and like the Mexican Cession. And for Lincoln and the Republicans, this represented a whole series of things that had to be done. The working class, sort of blue collar American labor had to be protected from the effect of slavery, which would depress wages and compete unfairly against working white working people, right? Presumably even free black people too, because why would you pay a free black guy or a free white guy when you could just buy a slave, right? And at the same time, Lincoln argued, as did many abolitionists, that to confine slavery in the area where it existed, to sort of cordon it off, would be necessary to restrict the pernicious effect that the slaveholders had on our political system. Right, the Republicans were fond of pointing out that since 1780, since 1775 or three, since 1773. The Americans had been making compromises after compromise with the Southerners, who increasingly revealed, particularly if you remember parts of our last lecture, that they really didn't care about anything other than slavery. That when push came to shove, the most important issue for them was protecting the institution of slavery. They didn't care about anything else. And so for Lincoln, we had to do something about that. And he thought that was a fair compromise. Remember, the Southerners argued that that was not the case. They thought that there was a distinction without a difference. If you ban slavery everywhere, it happens tomorrow. If you ban slavery everywhere governed by the federal government, it'll just happen everywhere in 20 years. Right? Eventually, what would happen is all those territories would become states, giving free states an absolute majority in the Senate. And then they would just propose, they already had a majority in the House because of their bigger population. And so someone would just propose an anti-slavery amendment. It would pass, and the southern states would have no choice. Even if they didn't ratify it, they would be outnumbered and they would just lose. And so they thought it was a question of like, are you banning slavery in Mississippi today, or are you going to ban it in like 25 years? There's no difference. And so they considered that worth fighting for. And remember, if you doubt it was about slavery, secession was about slavery, easily provable, because you can look at the documents that the southern states drew up. You can look at the ordinance of nullification they wrote, or the ordinances of secession were basically like legal documents seceding from the Union. But they also wrote these declarations of secession, these sort of essentially the Confederate version of the Declaration of Independence, repeated. Not all the 11 states did it, but like 5 or 6 or 7 of them did. And they pretty much mentioned slavery as the reason for the season, right? Remember, Texas mentions a bunch of stuff, and then loops back around and is like, in case you were wondering, it was like slavery. And so what happens? Well, Lincoln ends up as the Republican nominee. He wins in November. His vice president is Maine abolitionist Hannibal Hamlin, right? And he picks to be in his administration a bunch of his former rivals. He appoints Salmon P. Chase, a former Ohio governor and rival, to be Treasury Secretary. He appoints New York governor and former rival William Seward to be his Secretary of State, the number 2 man in the government in those days. Seward proposes a job whereby the Secretary of State would basically run the government and Lincoln would be a figurehead. He'd basically make himself prime minister. And Lincoln is like, nah, why would, like, Seward thinks Lincoln's stupid. And Lincoln is like, yeah, I get it, because only a moron would take that deal, right? But Seward has very little confidence in Lincoln's intellectual abilities, a fact that will change dramatically, a fact that will change significantly over the next several years. And so what about the Confederates? Well, they put together a government, and principally the government is really organized in the Confederacy by a group of guys they call fire eaters. These really hardcore, radical, secessionist, extremist, Southern slave owning dudes. It's William Lowndes Yancey and Robert Barnwell Rhett. And there's the one guy who fires the first shot at Sumter. I forget his name. Kills himself in 1865. He was a real son of a bitch, that guy. But these guys are sort of like the motive force behind it. And they realize that they have to pick a kind of a moderate to lead the South. They need to give the appearance that everybody in the South is like behind this. There's going to be a point when the boat is at sea, everybody has to pull an oar, right? I mean, you can't back out now. But to get the boat out of the dock, they want the appearance that this is a unanimous thing. So they compromise, and in Montgomery, Alabama, they select the former Secretary of War in I think it's the Pierce administration, and Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis. He owns a bunch of land. Davis Bend is what it's called, is south of Natchez on the Natchez Trace from Natchez to New Orleans. And Davis is a prickly, sanctimonious, priggish, kind of an asshole, not a very flexible guy, not a particularly good choice as terms of the job he would do as president of the Confederacy, but a politically adept choice because he represented a compromise between those sort of more extreme and modern wings of the Southern secessionists. And so, with his vice president, they picked the not so much moderate Georgia governor and I think former Senator Alexander Stephens. And Stephens gives a big speech where he says, and I quote, our civilization is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. And he describes that truth as the cornerstone, the bedrock of the South, which is awkward when the Southerners later try to reinvent themselves as small government conservatives as opposed to pro-slave owning racists. And so the Southerners start making this crap up as they go along. And to a certain degree, you do have to give them credit for inventing a government during a war. They write a constitution. It's pretty similar to the U.S. Constitution with some minor changes. The president serves a 6-year term, no re-elections, which is interesting. And people have toyed with that in the U.S. government. Give the president one election, give him 6 years, and then don't let him run. Because, of course, if you get elected president, about 18 months into your presidency, you start campaigning for the second presidency, which everyone wants. People have suggested, what if you just gave him 6 years? And they do it. They do it for Jefferson Davis. It's why there's no presidential election for the Confederacy during the Civil War. There's a few other minor changes. Also, the federal government can't mess with slavery in the states, which is a weird change to make to the Constitution if you're basically cutting and pasting the U.S. Constitution and making some changes, unless, of course, it was all about slavery to begin with, which is, I mean, I don't know why anyone thinks that. And so, having said that, they start appropriating federal weapons around the South. And so like Harper's Ferry's got the big arsenal Brown tried to rob. They loot that. There's a bunch of federal depots. There's one big federal naval facility and weapons facility near Richmond. They loot that. And the Tredegar Iron Works in downtown Richmond becomes the Confederacy's really only major weapons production facility during the Civil War, which is on the one hand impressive and on the other hand kind of pathetic, given that Connecticut, for example, produces guns for the Union, as does Ohio and like 5 other states. So good luck with your one gun factory. And so, by the way, you can go to the Tredegar Iron Works today. It's pretty cool. They turn it into a cool museum. It's got all kinds of cool like Civil War stuff, but also like, hey, everybody, remember slavery is sort of the real reason for this whole thing. And so, what can we say about the Civil War? It starts in 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina. And what happens is there are these forts all over the South that are occupied by federal troops. And some of the troops, they flip because they're like militiamen and slave patrols and stuff. The South is a pretty active militia system. But not all of them do. A lot of them are manned by federal troops who see themselves as being loyal to like the national government, right? So these guys, these troops, they sort of stay, loyal. And in a few places in Fernandina, there's a fort that holds out for quite a while, and I think the Navy evacuates them. And there's another one way out in like Pensacola where it's like the same thing. And it was sort of unimportant enough that it was like not a huge deal. But in Fort Sumter, the fort had been built in the like 1700s to protect against like piracy and raids. And the Fort Sumter's in Charleston Harbor. It's like a half a mile or so out off the harbor. And it's the guns on the fort are heavy, but they're cemented out to the sea. So it's not a threat to the city, other than, of course, the fort could prevent any it could prevent any ship from coming or going. Right? It could block the harbor basically. And so the guy in charge of the there's just towels. You just move them. The guy in charge of the garrison is Robert Anderson's a major. And Anderson realizes that his men are garrisoned on the waterfront in Charleston, which is maybe not like a super place to be. So in the middle of the night in like March, he evacuates them to the fort, which he thinks is safer, which it is. The negative of it is, of course, they're just kind of stuck out there. They have limited water, they have limited food, they can't. They're not any wet. They have small boats, but it's like you can't go to like the north in the boats. So you're not really sure what to do. And Anderson knows that I think 6 or 7 southern states have seceded. The situation's pretty grim, and of course he sends a message to Lincoln like, "Hey, what?" And so the Confederates. That's the message is I don't know what to do or whatever. Yeah, it's getting a little real. So I guess. So anyway, the Confederates put a bunch of troops in Charleston, and they decide there's a lot of effort to negotiate. Right, Lincoln sends down a message that he's going to send a supply ship called the Star of the West, and it's going to have like blankets and water and food. And his idea is like, if we just keep these guys from starving, we can negotiate. And like, if they starve, I'm going to have to rescue them, which is going to cause a fight, right? Like, I'm going to have to send in the Navy. If you attack, I'm going to defend. And in his inaugural address, Lincoln gave a speech where he said that he would remind his Southern brethren that they have sworn no oath to make war upon the Union, but he has just sworn a most solemn oath to protect it. Meaning, if you pick a fight with me, I'm constitutionally obligated to fight back. But if you just let us negotiate, like we don't have to, nobody has to draw a gun or anything. Nobody has to pull a sword. So the Southerners, the fire eaters, realize that this is their opportunity. If Lincoln successfully negotiates a compromise and pulls the Southerners back into the Union, I mean, that's it. We're done. You can just put it away. So, in fact, they push Jefferson Davis to use military action in Charleston. They push him to fire the first shot because they figure once that happens, it's like pushing a ball down a hill. It's just it has its own momentum. And so they do. It's in April 1861. Edmund Ruffin is the Southerner, the really crazy kind of pro-Southern guy, and he fires the first shot at Sumter. He pulls the lanyard on the first cannon. The cannon, by the way, is commanded by a general named, the whole battery. His name is Pierre Gustave Totant Beauregard. And someone once said of Beauregard, the only fancy thing about him was his name, which is some bullshit. Beauregard was a filthy rebel, but he was not a half bad general. It was pretty rude. He knew Anderson from West Point. One of them had been in the other one's artillery class. And then whoever was the teacher, I think it was Beauregard, had asked Anderson to come back and do like a stint as like a TA. And so, I mean, here he is ordering, they know these guys know they were in a classroom for 6 months, right? A semester at school. So Beauregard fires and shells the fort. Anderson is fine. None of his men die. The only casualty is a horse. A gun goes off early and it jumps back and it breaks the horse's legs and they shoot the horse. And so pretty sad, but that's it. And so what it does is starts the Civil War, right? I mean, Lincoln turns the Star of the West around. He suspends the negotiations and he's like, he sends a call for troops. He asks the states, there's no federal draft yet. And he asked the northern states to send him regiments of troops. The troops are raised by the states and sent to the federal government. And in response to Lincoln's call for troops, 4 more Confederate states secede. And so it's Virginia, Kentucky, a couple more. And so the worry that Lincoln has is that Maryland is going to secede, thus trapping the capital inside of the Confederate States. And so what Lincoln does is he prorogues the Maryland state legislature. He sends federal troops to prevent them from meeting so that they are not able to have a vote. On the one hand, a constitutionally dubious action. On the other hand, Lincoln justified it by saying, I'm in a war now, I have war powers, and I cannot allow Maryland to secede because it would make the capital of the United States uninhabitable. And so there's a case, I want to say it's Ex parte Merryman, I think is the case, federal case, in which Supreme Court Justice Roger P. Taney answers a writ of habeas corpus to ask one of the Maryland legislators to be brought to him and not be detained by the Lincoln administration. And he essentially says you have to be released and the government has to charge you with the crime. And there isn't one, so the whole thing is bullshit. And Lincoln basically says, have that. and ignores the case, ignores Taney, ignores the Supreme Court, and the whole thing just kind of blows over. And it's again, in the history of things Lincoln has done, that's constitutionally highly dubious. But on the other hand, Lincoln says, "What am I supposed to do? Let the guy out of prison, put him on a train to Annapolis. They're going to vote to secede, and then I'm fucked." So the answer is we're just not going to do that, right? And when Taney is like, "Hey, what about the Constitution?" Lincoln is like, "What about you kiss my ass?" Right? You don't really give a shit about it anyway. I mean, probably. Hmm. And actually, Taney dies in, I think it's like 1862 or 3, and Lincoln replaces him with former Treasury Secretary Simon P. Chase, and doesn't go to Taney's funeral. So they have a funeral for the Supreme Court justice, and Lincoln very, very, very pointedly does not attend. One of the rare instances when Lincoln is a dick, which normally he doesn't do that, but he doesn't even go to the funeral and is like, just send a polite note, with a yeah, send an edible arrangement. The worst one they have on the website. Right. So like, you're stupid. I hate your face. Sad. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. This is the same one. Taney. Remember, it's spelled Taney, Taney, like the Taneytown Road, which is in Gettysburg. But apparently, like according to the dude I got a lit with in Tuscany, it's Tawny. It's like Tawny, like a cat. But that's the same guy. Dred Scott v. Sanford. That's the same dude. Right. And again, I'm pretty sure it's Ex parte Merryman is the Supreme Court case in 1861, and Lincoln doesn't dignify him with the appearance. Right. So Lincoln gets the troops, and the South, they're seating, and Lincoln's initial troops, I want to say they're enlisted for either 60 or 90 days. And so, I mean, they get them uniforms, and they train them, and they march them around, and they show them how to load their guns. And then it's like getting up to the end of the enlistment. It's like, if it's 60 days, it's like day 45. And at that point, Lincoln says to the generals, like, I don't really want to tell you how to do your job because I don't really know anything about this war bullshit, but like, if you don't attack the Confederates, we're not going to actually win the war. But also, like, we're just going to furlough those guys. Just going to go home. Like, we paid them for nothing, basically, right? And so that sort of prods the generals into declaring a fight. And in the summer of 1861, you get the first battle, which is called the Battle of Bull Run. So a couple of things you can mention. The first is, you would say, does everybody have a plan for the Civil War? And the answer is nobody has a goddamn clue, right? The plan is basically, plans are for losers, and you're stupid for saying that we should have had a plan. And the actual plan is just, we're going to take our army, which is awesome, and their army, which totally stinks out loud, and we're going to smash them together like Hot Wheels cars. And then one of the armies will win, ours, because it's the better one, and the other one will fold like a wet rag, theirs, because it's stupid. And then we just march on the enemy's capital. They surrender because they're a bunch of losers, and we win, and that's it. I mean, like, I don't understand why you stupid pencil neck idiot think we need a plan, moron. And as you can imagine, that's not a very good plan, and yet that's basically the military strategy in 1861. Nobody has an actual plan. The one guy who does come up with a plan is one of my favorites, Winfield Scott, Old Fuss and Feathers. That's what they call him. He wears a big hat with a feather in it. Winfield Scott had fought in, I want to say he'd fought in like a whole bunch of wars. I don't think he fought in 1812, maybe, but he fought in the Mexican War. And when he fought in the Mexican War, he actually was worried that Zachary Taylor, who became president, was actually getting too little big for his britches. So it was Hancock who actually, it was Winfield Scott who actually sailed down the coast of Mexico and invaded Mexico at Veracruz, and then marched overland to Mexico City and fought the Battle of Chapultepec, and then won the war, because he was worried that Zachary Taylor was going to win that shit before anyone else could do it, and it would be sort of, he wanted the credit himself. Right. By the way, fun fact, if you know your history, the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortés actually marched the same route. He landed at Veracruz in 1519. He marched overland through Mexico. He came up between the two volcanoes. One of them is Popocatépetl, and there's another one next to it. And then he went into Valley of Mexico and defeated the Aztecs. And basically, Scott did the same thing. Right? So Scott comes up with this complicated plan. And I think in 1861, everyone is like, look at the nerd with his stupid plans. Right? But it turns out it's like a really fucking good plan. The plan is called, it's like War Plan 1A or some, I don't know, dumb thing. And the plan basically has 4 parts. What you do is you blockade the South using the U.S. Navy. The Navy didn't defect to the South. A bunch of Army regiments and commanders, like skilled leaders, all defected to the South. Guys like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and Beauregard, all of whom had been paid and trained by the U.S. government and the taxpayers, who'd sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. They rat-finked on the oath and joined the Confederate military, which is important to remember. Lee is not an honorable guy. He's a total shithead, right? But these guys joined the Confederate Army because Lee famously was offered command of the Union Army by Lincoln and refused, saying, I don't think I could draw my sword in anger against my home state. And so he went back and accepted a much crappier job in the Confederate Army defending the capital city of Richmond from Union attack, right? And so the Navy famously didn't have any of these problems. No Navy ships defected. The Navy was full of 2 groups of people, Irish immigrants and also free blacks. One of the few places that free blacks could serve and be treated reasonably was the Union Navy. And as you might imagine, a bunch of Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine and a bunch of free blacks are not exactly constituencies that give 2 shits about slavery. Remember, immigration in the North was a huge thing, 1840s and 50s. Why did immigrants go only to the North? Well, what the hell are you going to do if you get off a boat in the South? You're an Irish immigrant. You're from County Killearn. You get off the boat. You walk on. You say, I would do a manual laboring job to get my family settled and then try to get something better. And they're like, bro, we already got all these people we own. We don't need your crap, you know? So where did all the Irish immigrants go? They went to big port cities on the East Coast. Baltimore was about the farthest south they went. Tons of them went to Philadelphia. Tons of them went to New York City. Tons of them went to Boston. Tons of them went to places on the coast in Maine and Connecticut. None of them went south. So there's no Irish immigrants in the South. There are some that went down there, but all the land is owned by big landowners. They all went west or they all stayed in the north, right? And so a lot of them joined the Navy. Navy's great. You work for a while, you get out, and now you can be a crewman on a fishing boat. You already know how to do ships and stuff, right? So understandably, when the captain comes out and says, all right, everybody, the southern states seceded, formed a new country. What do you think? You get a bunch of black guys who are like, not really feeling it. So, and it's like, hey, USA, all right. And so what Scott proposes is using the Navy to blockade the South, to interdict ships coming in or out of southern ports. You got to do it from the Chesapeake Bay to Corpus Christi, Texas. It's going to take about 1.5 years, and they're going to do it. They're going to cut the South off entirely from the rest of the planet, right? And it's devastating. The Southern economy depends on using slaves to produce cotton, selling the cotton to the British to power all the textile mills and shit. And then the British sell you back manufactured goods, and you import those to the U.S. And you sell them for money, right? And so now the Southerners aren't going to be able to do it. They play into it. The Southerners make mistake number 1 of like 5 million. And mistake number 1 is they decide to prove to the British that you need to help us. And you need to help us because if you don't help us, we're going to jack your economy up. And the way they do it is they let the cotton harvest rot on the docks in 1861. The cotton is coming out in the spring 1861, in the summer 1861. And the Southerners, before the blockade is up, they withhold the cotton. And it's sort of like, it's like, you know, you go to your drug dealer and you go to buy it, and he's like, I don't have any. And the next day you come back and he's doubled his price, but you pay anyway, right? Because you got to have it. And that's what the Southerners feel like they're going to do. They're going to say to the British, no cotton this year, but next year, cotton all you want. The price is intervene in the Civil War, right? Send troops to help us, or we walk away. And of course, the British, it is not a great feeling to discover that the gentle caress on your testicles is the feel of somebody putting a vice on them and then tightening it to where you scream. And so the British realize, like, our entire economy is in the hands of these crazy Southerners. Maybe we're not super awesomely thrilled about that. And so they start looking for alternative places to produce cotton. And of course, they come up with 2 good ones: Egypt, which they're basically going to buy by assuming the debt of the Egyptian Khedive, which is really sleazy, but I mean, the Brits are whatever. And the second one is India, where the climate is pretty good at producing cotton, and they're going to start investing in cotton production. And of course, you look at the Indian flag today; it's got the orange, the green, and the white stripes, and the thing in the middle is the cotton wheel. It's a Hindu symbol. But what Gandhi wanted is he wanted Indians to spin their own cotton, so they could be independent of the British government, right? And why'd they get in cotton? Is the 1860s, right? So when the British, the Southerners come rolling up to the British in 1862, the British are like, you know, have some of that. Also, the British public isn't so hot on slavery, which the Southerners like didn't quite really pay a lot of attention to. We have questions.
Not a question, just a comment from me, because some of the questions have just been answered in the course of conversation. But hadn't Britain already abolished slavery by the time the American Civil War happened?
in 1830, well, in the 1770s or something, there was the Somerset decision, which basically it was the judge in Somerset County who argued that bringing a slave to a place that had no laws enacting slavery made them free. It's Britain's version of Dred Scott. And under Somerset, the judge ruled that slavery is an unnatural condition which has to be legally attached to somebody. So if someone goes to a place where there's no laws making them a slave, they're just not a slave. They're just not. And as a consequence, he ruled that slaves taken to England were free and slavery didn't exist in England. And in 1833, the British government had formally abolished slavery in the Dominions, the colonies, which was really only the Caribbean. That was the only place the British actually had that had any significant amount of slaves. And the big one was Jamaica, where, of course, there were like something like several 100,000 people, of whom maybe 25% or 10% were free, and the rest were enslaved. And so that was a big day in 1833 when they freed the slaves. Yeah, and so you could argue that the Indians were treated as badly as slaves, but there was no formal legal enslavement procedure underway in the Indian colonies. But slavery had been abolished in India, or in England, in the English colonies in the 1830s. Yeah. So and over the course of that really 60-year period, or I guess maybe like a 90-year period from the American Revolution up to the 1860s, the public became quite markedly anti-slavery. They didn't really do business with that. George III joined an abolitionist society, actually. One of the two Georges who led a country in the American Revolution that didn't like slavery, not George Washington, George III. Big whoops. Is there any questions? Okay. Who do we have? A bunch of people.
Shout outs to people watching. We've got Evan and Karen and to Tim, obviously, Matthew Hawk, and there's probably a couple of people watching who haven't said hello yet.
Say hello if you're watching, because my lovely and talented executive producer will give you a shout out. Yeah, Corey.
Yes, Corey is also here, but she hasn't commented.
Yeah. So anyway, that's part one of Scott's plan, and parts 2, 3, and 4 is to attack the Confederacy simultaneously in 3 places. In the west, to go down the Mississippi River and sever the Mississippi River, use the Mississippi River to sever the Confederacy into like basically 1/3, 2/3. You'd take Texas and Arkansas out of the war, and in the east to attack down the sort of the middle part of the Confederacy, like through Tennessee, and go down into like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and in the East Coast to go along the coast and attack maybe the capital of the Confederacy in Richmond, right? And the point Scott had was, if you blockade the South, you will weaken it, and then if you hit it in the 3 points simultaneously, they probably can't stop all of those things. They probably stop 1, maybe 2, not 3 at the same time, right? So Scott's plan gets leaked to the press, and the press thinks it's stupid. I mean, like, why make a big plan for a whole war if you're a stupid nerd when the war is going to be over in like, what, 2 weeks or some shit? I mean, like, and remember, as every war, Alexander the Great invades Persia in like the 350s, the 340s BC, and is like, guys, we're going to be done. We're going to be home for, I don't even know, like 6 weeks or whatever. And like the Germans invading the Soviet Union in World War II were like, man, we'll be definitely home we're invading in June. We'll be home by September. And it's like, yeah, no, you won't, right? And so like Vietnam, it's like, look, Kennedy's like, look, we're just going to send some dudes in 1962 or whatever, and they're going to be back in like 6 months. And it's like, yeah, like 10 years, I remember the Iraq War, man, just shock and awe, man. We'll be out of there in 24 hours, right? And so nobody ever is like, guys, this war is going to take decades. This is going to be some shit. Other than, I guess, Winston Churchill, who said that in the Commons in 1940. Yeah, I mean, nobody in a democracy is going to be like, all right, everybody, we're going to war for the rest of the century. It's like, no.
Well, even Winston Churchill, I mean, he may have said that, but there was a whole idea that all the troops would be home for Christmas.
Well, I mean, they're going to be home by Christmas. They're going to get their ass kicked out of Europe by the Nazis. But when he gave the big speech in the speech just announcing the probable German invasion of England, he said, we're going to fight for years if we need to. And everybody in the Commons was like, yeah, well, I mean, but that was not a war they had picked to fight. That was a war that was being sort of, Hitler was going to invade England, right? So anyway, World War II. And so when the press got wind of the Anaconda plan, they ridiculed it. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. When they got rid of the plan, they ridiculed it and called it the Anaconda plan because it's like so stupid, right? You're going to wrap the army around the South like a. And remember, anacondas are super badass, giant South American snakes that strangle stuff and then eat it, which is rad. Yeah.
Did most people even have a concept of what an anaconda was?
Yeah, it's a big snake. I mean, people knew it was a big snake. Yeah, there's a political cartoon called Scott's Great Snake, and it shows a big anaconda wrapped around the South squeezing. Which, when I put it up, I say it's super badass because giant snakes are rad. But of course, this is the name making fun of the plan. Like the press uses this name as being like, this plan's dumb. It's an anaconda plan.
I mean, I get that, but I have totally also seen what certain Renaissance painters and other historical types of painters thought cats looked like, and that was dramatically wrong. So,
yeah, I mean, I assume
people understanding what an anaconda from only South America looks like seems a bit
I assume people knew it was probably a big snake. Not you can watch the docudrama that was one of Jennifer Lopez's first movies, and it's not a very good one. It's not.
Anacondas it is not a docudrama.
87 feet long, and also they don't have fangs. Yeah. That one does feature an appearance by the dreaded Candiru, which is the fish that can swim into your body and bite. Yeah, it's real. Yeah, it's a shout out to the Venture Brothers. Got a good scene with the dreaded Candiru. And so anyway,
oh yes. Also, hi Mom, hi Cindy.
And so having said that, that's Winfield Scott's plan, and it doesn't get a lot of play. Oh God, until later in the war. But that's like he throws that on the table, and everybody basically ignores it until they realize like we kind of have to do this, right? So anyway, let's talk about the first battle, which is Bull Run. Bull Run. Okay, so Civil War battles have wacky names. Everyone has two names. The Confederates name it, and the Union names it. And the naming convention is pretty simple. The Confederates look at the map, and they say, okay, here's the battle. What's the nearest town? And they name it for the nearest town. So unless there was no town really close by, but usually there is. And the Union does the same thing, but they look at the map and say, what's the nearest thing with a name? It can be a town. It doesn't have to be a town. It could be anything. It can be a woods, a bridge, anything with any geographical or sort of map feature. And you would say, oh, do we use the Confederate name for battles that they won and the Union name for battles? No, we use whichever name sounds rad. And that's what, and also sometimes they use both names. And so you just that's the way it is. The Bull Run is called Bull Run by the Union because it's Bull Run Creek. There's a creek. A run is another name for a creek. The Southerners call it Manassas Junction because the town of Manassas is nearby and it has a railroad junction, which is what the battle is fought over. And the battle is a real shit show. The Union and Confederate armies roll up. They blow the whistle. They just kind of march at each other. And one guy described it as like two groups of people fighting in a bar. Basically, there's no organization. There's nobody really knows what the hell they're doing. A bunch of people from Washington came out to watch the battle. It's like it's a picnic. They all get their picnic baskets and they get their blankets and the kids, and it's a nice Sunday outing. And then the battle starts and people are like shooting each other in the chest and screaming, and there's like blood everywhere. And people are lying on the battlefield screaming for their mother because their guts are hanging out. And everybody's like, holy shit, we should not have brought the kids to this. And the Union Army breaks and runs. Actually, a Union senator stops them at Manassas, and he's got a gun, and he waves it at some Union soldiers, and he's like, go back and fight. And the Union guys are like, look, all you're going to do is shoot us, which is the same thing the Confederates are going to do, and we're running from them. And the senator's like, all right, get the hell out of here. And so the Union Army loses, but the Confederates are so disorganized they can't do anything. They sort of don't have any capacity to attack or anything. So the battle's kind of a draw, And so at the same time, not a lot happens in 1861. Not a lot else happens in 1861. We should mention out west, there's this guy, Ulysses Grant. Grant's a loser. He was from Ohio. He got into the West Point. The way West Point worked is they used to allocate slots in West Point to the senators of every state as a perk. And if you knew the senators, you'd get your kid into West Point. And the senators usually would farm them out as favors, right? If you were a state senator and you knew a kid who you wanted to send to West Point, you might go to the senator and say, "Look, I got a name. I'll send it to you. In return, I owe you one later, or maybe I'll vote." Remember, the senators get elected by the state legislature, so maybe you trade that for some votes or something. So Grant's family used a connection to get him into West Point. They sent him a big letter like, "Bring all this shit in a footlocker and come at this day and time." And they said, get a wood trunk and put your initials on it in brass tacks. So he gets a bunch of brass tacks and he's going to spell out his initials: Hiram Ulysses Grant. HUG spells hug. Well, I got to tell you, you're going to get your ass kicked a lot if you have your initials be hug at military school. So he changed his name and it's Ulysses Simpson Grant, not his real name. But if you join the army and they whatever name goes on the form is your name for the rest of your life, and you die, they're putting that shit on your tombstone. If it's not spelled right, that's too goddamn bad. And so Grant becomes Ulysses Simpson Grant, United States Grant, U.S. Grant, Unconditional Surrender Grant, whatever you want to call it. So Grant goes to West Point, doesn't do very good, doesn't have a good record, not academically good. Lee went through West Point with one demerit, a record that wasn't broken until the 20th century. And frankly, Lee having one demerit means he's kind of a loser, right? You want to get hammered? No. You want to stay up late? No. You want to go chase girls? No. You want to play cards? No. Lee didn't have a personality, which is what I'm saying. And if you think I'm lying, I'm not. And so Grant was a party guy, and he did okay. Goes to Mexico. He does all right. There's a great moment in Mexico where the Mexicans are shelling him, and Grant realizes, like, this is some scary shit. I might die. But then he thought, well, I mean, fuck these guys. He said, anything they can do to me, I can do to them too. Right? If they're in range, if I'm in range of their guns, they're in range of my guns. And typical Grant understatement, he says something like, that was a very significant revelation. Right? And so Grant's always got this attitude. It's like a boxing ring. If you get close enough to me for you to punch me, yeah, I'm scared of that, but also I could just be punching you back, right? It's like I can be giving it as well as taking it, right? And so Lee uses his army like it's a rapier, right? I mean, he uses it with some skill and some finesse. Grant uses his army like it's a Mack truck, right? He gets it going fast, he points it in your direction, and he hits you with it, and he wrecks your world. Right, and it's not very complicated, but Grant's like, well, you don't have to be complicated with 60,000 soldiers, right? And so we'll come back to that because Grant wins 2 battles in 1861. And if you're Lincoln, you really need some victories to convince people that this wasn't a fucking disaster. And the only 2 you got in 1861 is Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, where Grant, he had gotten out of the army after Mexico because he married this lady, Julia. And her family thought that he was a loser. And he got out of the army, got into business, and stank. I mean, investing in Betamax after VHS becomes a thing, stank at business. Right, and like owning shares in Yahoo business, right? And so what happens is Grant gets into the army because he needs a job, and he ends up in charge of recruit processing, and he uses some connections to get a job with some soldiers, and he invades and captures 2 Confederate forts, Henry and Donelson. He loses like Donelson or some shit. He doesn't post any guards, and the Confederates take it or something. But Lincoln could be like, look, we're not. It's not all a disaster. Like this one guy, and of course it's significant because Grant, like he looks like he kind of knows which which way this goes, right? He looks like he can find his ass with a map in one hand, if not both, right? And with him, by the way, is a regular army dude, William Tecumseh Sherman, out of California. From Ohio, comes back to the U.S. after the California Gold Rush, and gets back in the regular army. Sherman is writing these panicky memos to the War Department, saying basically like, guys, we are fucked, right? And he has a nervous breakdown, and so the rumors come out that Sherman's crazy and Grant's a drunk during the war. Famously, a bunch of ministers come to Lincoln and they say to Lincoln, "You got to fire this guy Grant because he drinks too much, and it's not good for the kids to see that." And Lincoln says to them, it's an apocryphal story, but it's great. He says, if you could tell me what kind of whiskey Grant drinks, I will buy a case of it for every general's, for I cannot spare this man, he fights. Because Grant's a fighter, right? And so Sherman once said that I stood by Grant when he was a drunk. Grant stood by me when I was crazy. So I guess we'll be friends forever, right? Which is sort of like a heartening thing, right? And together those guys would mess up a lot of Confederate rebel traitors. So that's not too shabby. So anyway, what do we talk about 1862 now? So 1862, um, Lincoln decides that we got to attack the Confederates, right? So we're gonna fight another battle, the Second Battle of Bull Run, which is also a disaster, right? So it's not great. Same kind of thing. Confederates attack, Union Confederate both attack. They meet. There's a big fight. It's sort of inconclusive, right? At this point, Scott is kind of like, "Hey, what about my plan?" And everybody's like 25% less negative on it because it's like, "Well, we said the war's gonna be over 6 months, 12 months ago, so maybe your plan is not stupid." Okay. And so the thing we need to talk about, the big campaign we're going to talk about, there's three that we need to talk about. The first one is the Peninsular Campaign. So Lincoln is firing generals. The Union armies are the Union Army. The whole thing is divided into what are called corps, right? And so they're divided into Army Corps, and an Army Corps is grouped into an army will be grouped into several corps, and a corps will have divisions and then brigades and regiments all the way down. Right, and the army in the east is the Army of the Potomac. The army in the west is the Army of the Tennessee. Right, and so they're named for rivers. The Confederacy names them for states. They have the Army of the Mississippi and the Army of Northern Virginia, which is the one that Lee will end up in charge of. Right, so the Army of the Potomac has a revolving door. Lincoln brings in a commander. You seem great. You're competent. You get your ass kicked. You're fired. You seem great. You get your ass kicked. You're fired. Next guy. Next guy. And it's really kind of horrifying because Lincoln doesn't have a lot of skilled commanders. A bunch of these guys have defected to the Southerners, right? So along comes George Brinton McClellan, who thinks he is God's gift to ladies, business, warfare, looking good, nicknames, everything. Right? He goes by the nickname the Young Napoleon. Which is an awesome nickname to have for a guy who's never been in a war. It's sort of like you start out boxing and you're like, I'm the young Mike Tyson. And they're like, how many matches have you done? And you're like, just go for it. Just go. Yeah, it's fine. Oh, can you, okay. I thought it was just in the fridge. The peanut gallery is getting more booze. And so it's like, how many boxing matches you've been in? And it's like 0. And it's like, isn't it a bit presumptuous to call yourself? It's like, whatever, I'm the young Mike Tyson or I'm the young Evander Holyfield. And so it's like young Napoleon is a bit much for a guy who's like not seen a lot of combat. But anyway, McClellan had gotten out of the army in the 1850s and had been the head of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, where he did okay, made a bunch of money. Comes back 1862, comes up with a plan. It's an okay plan. Plan is this. The plan is you take the entire Union Army south of Washington, D.C., and you put them on boats in the Chesapeake Bay. You send them down the Chesapeake Bay to the peninsulas southeast of Richmond, where like the York and the James River are. It's where Jamestown was in the 1600s. It's where the Battle of Yorktown was in the 1700s. The Hamilton song is about the Battle of Yorktown. It's right there in the same place. If you go to that place in Virginia and you swing a dead cat, it's going to hit like 7 historical markers from 4 centuries of American history.
Some of which are now Taco Bells.
Yeah. I mean, the Yellow Tavern, which is in Virginia, where Jeb Stuart died, is a legit Dairy Queen. And there's a battle in the 7 Days campaign we're going to talk about where it's the back of a scrapyard. And the dude who owns the scrapyard is chill. I went there and he let me in the back and I just walked around and there's another place. It's the Heights on what is it? It's like Mary's Heights. No, that's not it. But it's the Heights at Shiloh. It's just some dude's farm. Like it's just some guy. It's a working farm, and he just and like if you go to Fredericksburg, it's like the back of people's houses, and there's like a CVS and shit where the battlefield used to be. It's all built over, right? Virginia is bad about that.
I mean, I'm going to go in. You can go ahead and open the next battle if you need to, but I'm going to go in and jump in there and say, perhaps we don't need to be preserving some of these battle sites, because I know that you've been to a lot of them and you've toured a lot of them and you don't agree with me about that. But there's also these organizations out there that want you to buy the land and clear the land and then sell it to them for historic preservations because they're not allowed to change the land.
Plug out to my boys in the Virginia Battlefield Trust, where the Parks Department will get this land and they can't change it. So when they get it, if you go, there's like Gaines Mill, 7 Days campaign in Gaines Mill. It's all completely forested over, and they built a little path through the woods on a boardwalk. And you look and you're like, who the hell can fight a battle in here? And the answer, of course, when I asked one of the guides, he's like, look, back in the 19th century, people chopped this shit down to build houses and do firewood, so it's completely empty. But of course, then when the war's over, it just force grew back, right? So what the Virginia Battlefield Trust does is a bunch of nerds that I know, and they're real great guys, like Bob Crick and a few other guys. And what they do is they buy acres of land that were battlefields in the Civil War, and they clear cut them. They sell the timber to timber companies, and then they give them to the Parks Department, which will preserve them in that state. They will clear cut them if they grow too many trees, right? And that's important because the Civil War guys want the battlefields to look like they originally were supposed to look like. So you can go and you can see, that's the whole point. And so at Antietam, they actually planted it all with soybeans, which grow really short because at the time of the battle was planted with winter wheat. And if they planted wheat, it would be like really high. So they planted it today with soybeans, so that you can see roughly what the battlefield looked like, and then they just harvest the soybeans and like give it to a food bank or something.
No, I'm sorry, but are you not seeing how it's really weird that people want to go play make believe as Civil War soldiers?
It's separate from reenacting, because when you have people tour the battlefields and you have people come out and like see the battlefields, you want them to see what it actually looked like so they can understand how the battles worked, right? I mean, if you go to Gaines Mill and it's completely forested, you can't at all understand how the soldiers fought because nobody can walk 2 feet without going around a tree, right? So when you visit as a civilian, when you as a parks a visitor, you want people to come and you see what the battlefields really looked like so they can understand how they worked. It's reenacting is another whole thing, because on the one hand, sure, except of course that means people dressing as Confederates, which is like a little creepy. And the Confederate soldiers are always there's twice as many of them as there are Union soldiers. It's not as popular in the North as it is in the South, which is like weird, right? And so you can argue that when the Parks Department should preserve these battlefields in their 1860s state as best they can, which doesn't necessarily mean you want everybody to dress up and go pretend to be, Confederates. I don't know that I necessarily am so much for that. Anyway, you have questions? Yeah, let me get some drink.
Yeah, Karen wants to know what's happening at like Verdun. Like, has that been?
Verdun is a World War I battle.
Yeah, she wants to know if it's been like reforested.
Oh, yeah. So some of the World War One. Yeah, I'm sorry, Karen. I was like, I don't know. If you go to northeastern France, some of the battlefields have been left alone. Some of them have been turned into cemeteries. Some of them are French towns. I mean, some of them rebuilt France and Belgium. If you go to a few places, like I think Verdun and a couple, you can see the trenches barely. You can walk and you can kind of see where the trenches are. But for the most part, they have let them kind of return to nature, and the trenches are kind of gone. Right, and so if you know what you're looking for, you can find them in a few places. Some World War II battlefields, the D-Day beach is still empty. You can walk on that. I've walked on that. If you go to Volgograd, which was Stalingrad, they have a few buildings left over that you can see the damage from. But a lot of that has been rebuilt, of course, because it was 70 some odd years ago, right? Particularly also the cities were really badly destroyed, so they had to rebuild them, right? So a lot of the World War II stuff, you really got to kind of know exactly what you're looking for. And the out of the way battles are kind of still like, if they're the Battle of the Bulge, you can see some stuff because it's like in the woods. But a lot of the big urban battles, Battle of Berlin, Battle of Stalingrad, Siege of Leningrad, those are kind of gone. You can't really see anything. And so the trenches from World War One are mostly gone on the Western Front. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple comments that people have said. Heather says says great points, but she's with me on that. Sarah is saying that she kind of understands what you're saying. She's been to Gettysburg as a kid and saw the battlefields, and it would not have had the same impact as a McDonald's. But can I draw you into like a point of potential controversy for a moment?
Let me get some wine.
Okay, so my question is, like, right now, what's going on or a few weeks ago, at least in American culture, was the removal of Confederate battlefields.
Yeah.
And a lot of what people were saying then is, you have to think about the perspective of people who were, descendants of people who were enslaved and that sort of thing. When they walk past these things and they see this, and they're even just plantation homes that we've preserved and things like that, they're really reminded of this. And there's that meme going around that I know you've seen of like, oh, because we won't remember these things if we can't see them. Heaven forbid somebody open a book.
Well, one way to look at it too is there's a difference, I think, between monuments that were erected after the Civil War and actual battlefields where these events occurred. And I think you can separate and say putting a monument to Jefferson Davis in your downtown square is a little different from saying, hey, this was a battlefield site. Like the events actually happened here so maybe we should kind of preserve it, right? And so let me like do my spit over. And so you can make a distinction between those things. But on the other hand, also on the historical site, you got to be careful what you say, right? Because I've been to plantations where they were like, basically, it's gone with the wind. And I've also been to plantations where they said, lots of stuff about the people that lived in the big house, but then you could go to the slave cabins and they had lots of stuff about the enslaved people, right? There was a really good one I was in north of New Orleans where they had the slave cabins were made of cedar, so they were really well preserved. And they had basically half of the tour was go to the big house, learn how the big house worked, learn how the master and the slave owners work. But then the other half of the tour was like, okay, now we're going to go to the slave cabins and like you can do just as much information about how the enslaved people lived as well. So you got to be careful about how you pitch it, right? And I think the same is true of the Civil War battles. You can preserve the battlefield. People can go to it and they can see the battle and they can see the information, and you cannot really glorify it. You cannot really be flag waving from one side or the other. But I think that's qualitatively different from maybe a monument to Jefferson Davis in your town square, or the Confederate flag in the case of South Carolina over the capital of South Carolina in Columbia, which like you can't avoid walking past. Whereas if you're an African American and you don't particularly care to visit a Civil War battlefield, I mean that you don't have to. No one is saying that you should have to. Right, but on the other hand, like if you want to go do business at the state capital of your state, like you kind of can't avoid the Confederate flag. I get that. Tim. Yeah.
My question is just playing devil's advocate here. Are there any Japanese memorials in Pearl Harbor?
There is a Japanese shrine in Yasukuni, which is in Japan, where it's a cemetery and they have a Buddha shrine and they ring the bell on the anniversary of the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki bombings because people who died there were buried there. But it also has the graves of several Japanese commanders who were executed for war crimes. And so it's very controversial to do that. No, there are no Japanese monuments to like anybody that died at Pearl Harbor or anything like that. No. Yeah, I bet if you go to Little Bighorn, there's probably a battlefield park there, and it probably has stuff about there's stuff about the Sioux at Little Bighorn. Yeah, I mean, sure. And why wouldn't there be 50% stuff about the 7th Cavalry, 50% stuff about the Sioux, right? Because if you're making an educational experience, like come to Little Bighorn, learn about battle. I mean, you'd want to have like here is the Sioux and here are the Native American or here are the American soldiers, and like let's talk about why they were fighting and blah blah blah. Right? I mean, like I think you can do that. And most of I said Park Service is pretty good. Most of the Civil War battlefields have been pretty reasonable about like the visitor center has lots of stuff about slavery. And then the battlefield itself tend to have stuff about like the troop movements and stuff and what you're looking at and pictures of the actual battle happening and that sort of thing.
No, I'm just kind of thinking because I'm trying to phrase how I want to challenge you on this, because I've also been on some of these tours with you, and not to the battlefields because that's not my interest, but I've been to enough quote unquote plantation homes, and I've been to Kingsley Plantation that's in North Florida. And while they do talk about the homes and the way that the enslaved people live, there's still a whole lot out there that they just kind of gloss over in China. I mean, people that we know that have been to Monticello, they say it's like two separate tours whatsoever. And the person who's actually in the house doing the tour of the house can only talk about architecture. And if you try and ask them a question about, the enslaved people who labored in the house, they have not a clue.
Well, remember, Monticello is getting better because Annette Gordon Reed, who wrote the book, literally wrote the book about Jefferson's relationship with the slave Sally Hemings, has been instrumental in kind of helping them make a more nuanced approach to Jefferson's past at Monticello. And Mount Vernon too apparently has been getting better in recent years, where they've done a lot more stuff about the people that worked as enslaved people on Washington's plantation. And that's, I mean, at some level, the Park Service has a responsibility to be reasonable about that, right? I mean, sure, if you go to George Washington's house at Mount Vernon, you want to learn about George Washington, but you're not going to tell the whole story unless you tell about like what about all those slave cabins down there and the people that lived and worked in those too. It's like 100 of them, right? And so that, I mean, I appreciate why. And it's a thing. The Civil War is a huge thing for white Americans. It's the most popular part of American history other than World War II. It's a huge cultural thing for many, many, many Southerners and a lot of Northerners. My dad grew up celebrating in Vermont the Vermont soldiers who fought at Gettysburg. But for most Black Americans, they ignored it. It was not something that they cared about, and that's a shame because it's something that is so interesting and fascinating. But of course, most Black Americans thought this is some bullshit where white people are going to wave Confederate flags. And you can totally understand that. And it wasn't really until the 60s when people began to really reappraise the history of the Civil War and in fact, a lot of good Black historians wrote a lot about slavery. Right, like Blassingame, I think, was African American, and is the slave family. I forget who wrote that, but I have it upstairs instead of too much wine. But these guys like wrote sort of very penetratingly about the Civil War and the South, and sort of created a space for African Americans to not essentially have to walk into like a Dixie, sort of Confederate Orama history, which understandably, like if you're an African American family, you're going to take the kids on a vacation, like you're not going to take them to Gettysburg, right? You're not going to take them to Shiloh. You're just not a place that you think is relevant, right? And so, I mean, I get that, but on the other hand, I mean, it's a thing that happened. As a history professor, if it's a place where a thing happened, I would want to preserve that. I would want to, and it doesn't mean you can't be honest about it. You got to be careful not to be propaganda or whatever. But it's like this was a battle happened here. Like we shouldn't pave it over and turn it into like a Stuckey's, right? Okay.
I'm just going to acknowledge Chrissy's comment here that her dad lived in Richmond and grew up where Robert E. Lee's birthday was a holiday. So like we're still dealing with that. And okay, Chrissy's about our age, and so her dad. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show that one. Her dad obviously is 60, late 60s, early 70s, probably around that age. I'm sorry, I'm reading a comment from Sarah. She says, today, little difference, like the difference between having a statue to Hitler versus preserving concentration camps. Remembering the history does not mean we need to glorify the war criminals. I would argue with that one that there's also a lot more educational material about the travesties that happened there, at Auschwitz and at Warsaw and the ghettos and things like that. We spend almost the entire time talking about the tragedy of the lost lives, whereas when we talk about the Civil War, it's a lot more, oh, Robert E. Lee is this great general, and let's talk about Jefferson Davis and name all of these cities after him. But I've gotten you on a significant tangent here, so let's get back to what actually happened during the Civil War.
Which Sarah is commenting?
That was Sarah Knight Pendleton.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, what's up, Sarah? We have multiple Sarahs that might have come, but it was Sarah. It was and also Sarah wandering around. I don't know, probably breaking stuff. She's doing good. Yeah, they've both been pretty quiet. Not gonna lie. What's that? And so we got on here, but of course this really speaks to how the Civil War is like a really significant touchstone in American history for a lot of people, and yet it's like a really controversial topic. It's this really hotly debated topic. It makes sense, right? And I took a graduate class in like foreign policy, and we got to World War II. It's American foreign policy. We got to World War II, and he's like, "Look, we don't need to talk about World War II, right? We shot Nazis. It was great. Move on." And he's like, "It's not controversial at all." And I was like, "Bro, in European history, World War II is like mega controversial, right? Like the Germans don't know how to feel. Like, should you be proud about your parents who defended their country from Russian invaders? Well, yeah, but they're Nazis." And the French, like their army folded like a wet rag. And the British like defended the empire, so it was great, but also like, I don't know, the empire full of killing brown people. And like the Russians helped kill Hitler, but they were also commies. So, and it's like everybody's got these like super mixed feelings about it. And he was like, yeah, no, I mean, that's Europe, but in America, like, what's there to feel bad about, right? Like in a certain sense, it was the good war, right? And so in a way, the Civil War is like, it's been portrayed as the good war for a long time by both sides. But on the other hand, like, I don't know, that wasn't really the whole story, right? The Southerners based their entire identity in some cases around the idea that the Civil War was like this great moment where they defended their freedom. And it was like, yeah, that was basically a bunch of propaganda BS, right? I mean, that's not really what happened. And that's only really beginning to be a thing that is grappled with in the culture as like a whole, right? I mean, it's only really in the past couple of decades, only since the 60s have academic historians challenged that, and only really in the past 20 years or so has that really been something we fought about in the public space, right? And so, I mean, I get that this is the thing. We wouldn't be having this fight if I was talking to you about like the War of 1812 or like Vietnam or like the Korean War or something, which of course the Civil War is sort of different, right? Is not the same thing. Right, but yeah, I mean, and how we memorialize the Civil War. On the one hand, the Confederates kind of ruined it, right? You preserve a battlefield, and you make the argument I made, it's a battlefield. We should preserve it. Something happened here. But you also fall afoul of my executive producer's argument that, like, in preserving it, aren't we kind of glorifying the bad guys? Like, and on the one hand, no, because we're just preserving it. But on the other hand, there's been 150 years of glorifying the bad guys, so like maybe we should just maybe let it go, right? And when the Germans they filled Hitler's bunker with concrete because you would love to tour it. That's where Hitler spent 6 months of his life. On the other hand, they were like, nah, we're just going to fill that shit with concrete and bury it, like metaphorically and literally. And so, like, maybe the Civil War should be given a certain distance, right? I don't know. That's the. But anyway, from my perspective, I would want to take people to the battlefield and so they can see it. And it's hard because, again, some of these places they've not been kept up in the way that they were. And the Park Service has those regulations where they when they get the battlefield and they buy it sometimes off of private people, they have to keep it how it is when they get it, whether or not that's what it was like in 1861, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So anyway, McClellan, right? McClellan's plan is to take the army down the Chesapeake Bay, land them on the peninsulas, and go up from the southeast to attack Richmond. And he figures if you do it quick, the Confederate army of Robert E. Lee defending Richmond from the north, they won't know what's happening, and you capture the capital. It's not a bad plan. It's not a shitty plan. The problem is McClellan is he's a dipshit. And the army goes so slow that Lee is not a moron. Lee wakes up one morning and someone says, General, the entire Union army was over that hill 2 days ago and they're gone. Well, Lee doesn't say, well, I guess they went home or whatever. Instead, he says, well, I guess we need to start looking for these guys. And somebody says, okay, sir, they've been sighted southeast of Richmond. And Lee says, all right, let's move around the city to the southeast, right? I mean, it's not rocket science, right? And so by the time McClellan gets his shit together, Lee is ready to stop him southeast of Richmond. They fight 7 battles in 7 days. McClellan loses 6 of the 7 battles. There's Malvern Hill and there's Gaines Mill and there's a couple more. And really what Lee does is he beats McClellan like a snare drum. And it's just humiliating. And this is really the moment when Lee becomes this really fearsome commander who is really skilled. What is happening with the kid? Well, I mean, you hang around Fang, you're just gonna get the he farts a lot. That's what I mean. What can you do? Yeah, Fang is for real.
He's small but mighty.
Yeah, no, it's a real thing. And so having said that, McClellan's out. He's fired. Lincoln's like, well, fuck you. And so that's it for him. And so Lee gets this reputation as this widowmaker, right? This guy who like knows what he's doing, right? And so having said that, the other battle we mentioned is Shiloh. Out west, Grant has come off his 1862 success by attacking into Mississippi. His goal is the city of Corinth. It's named for Greece, right? Excuse me. It's named for the Greek city. It's got a railroad crossing. It's got a north-south, east-west railroad crossing in the town. So the Union army's headed south from Tennessee into Mississippi. The Confederate army's headed from Mississippi up north. This Albert Sidney Johnston is in charge of it. His right-hand man, Pierre Gustave Totem Beauregard, is the number 2. Governor of Mississippi is with him because, of course, the state's about to get jacked up, right? And so the Union Army of Tennessee, is in the command of Grant, his right-hand man, Sherman. Grant sends Sherman ahead. Or like April 1862, the rains are bad, the Tennessee River's high. Sherman scouts and finds a place called Pittsburgh Landing. It's a steamboat landing where they used to unload and load cotton on steamboats. He gets the army across. They got wagons and oxen and shit. And he sends Grant a message. This is the only place I think you're going to be able to get the army across. The next day, Sherman comes out of the tent, and the whole Union army is getting off at the depot. He finds Grant, and Grant says, well, you told me this is the only place we can cross fucking Tennessee River. So where do you think we're going to go? And so they form up south of Pittsburgh Landing, and they start making plans to attack Mississippi. Before they can do it, Johnston's army attacks them. Right? Johnston's army attacks them. Albert Sidney Johnston, we should mention, arguably the most skilled Confederate general, big flowing mustache. Ladies, I know, just you need to take a minute. Long curly golden hair, big smile, lady killer. Johnston was renowned as a ladies' man and a heartbreaker. So he's got it going on with the ladies and also the soldier stuff. So they cross the border into Tennessee and they hit the Union line south of Pittsburgh Landing. They named the battlefield for a little tiny clapboard wood church in the woods, Shiloh Hope Church. which is this. Shiloh is the Arabic word, a Hebrew word that means peace, and the church is about the size of like my kitchen, right? And so the morning, it's like April 12th or 15th or something. The morning of the battle, the Confederates come out of the woods. The Union engage the skirmishers. It's like a couple hundred, 500, 1,000. The Union commander gets his shit together and realizes the whole fucking Confederate army. He sends a message to Sherman. He gets killed. The Confederates occupy the road crossing south of him. Sherman realizes this is for real. He goes all in, right? Sends all of his men out. They fight all day long. They fight across a big wheat field that the Union army is camped at. Everybody cooks their breakfast. The Confederates hit the camp as everyone's eating their breakfast. They roll the Union up and steal all their breakfast, which really stinks. You cook these goddamn biscuits in the bacon grease. You're going to eat the bacon and the biscuit, and the Confederate son of a bitch over there, Jeb Confederate's eating your shit. But the Confederates stop their attack long enough to eat the breakfast, which gives the Union enough time to recover. And they fight all day. And Grant said at the end of the first day of Shiloh, he said you could have walked across the wheat field without touching the ground. There were so many dead bodies. So many people died. And at the end of the day, Grant is about to get pushed in the Tennessee River. They're about dead. Johnston, he gets shot. He's watching the battle with his men, and the governor of Mississippi looks over and realizes Johnston looks like crap. Come here, Ita. Yes, will you wish to join us and make a cameo? Yes, this is Isabella. Okay, Isabella is very nice. Okay, yeah, you can sit here. And so
Karen, I have put up a map for you that I found on Wikipedia, just to give them credit.
Isabella says hello. You are very cute. Okay, you're very nice. Okay. And so Johnson doesn't look so great, and the governor of Mississippi is like, "Hey, are you okay, bro?" And Johnson's like, "Ugh," and he falls out of his horse, and his big cavalryman's boot is full of blood. He got hit in the back of the knee with a musket round, it's about half an inch wide, and it severed the artery in his knee. Bleeds out in about 2 minutes. And how do you get shot in the back of the knee when you're on a horse looking at the battle? The answer is you got shot by your own men. Big oops, right? And if you go to Shiloh today, you can see the tree where he died is bullshit. He died about 50 yards away from that tree in a creek bed. They dragged him over. He bled to death in like 2 minutes. So Pierre Gustave Totant Beauregard is the man now, and he orders a halt to the attack. The sun is going down. Everybody's spread out. Sun's going down, big guy. Nobody really knows where we are. It's very confusing. And so Beauregard gets blamed by this. The Southerners give him a bunch of shit for this, which is not fair. Because he made a perfectly reasonable decision to stop the attack. He said, "Just chill out." There's just hugging you.
There's a complaint that because I was showing you an essay on this.
Oh, come here, Isa. Put her down, and I'll get her to come over. Isabella, Isa, come here, Fortune. Yeah, no, we're gonna have hugging. Can I give you hugging? Yeah. Okay. Oh, Isa's so beautiful. Yeah, Isa's a good kitty cat. Okay, it's Isa, everybody. Isabella of Castile, the Queen of Spain, 1467, married Ferdinand. 1492, defeated the Muslims, expelled the Jews in St. Columbus West. Her daughter, Juana la Loca, imprisoned in a monastery. Her son, Charles, Holy Roman Emperor, grandson Philip, King of Spain, tried to marry Mary Tudor. Right? That's right. Founded the Inquisition. Yeah.
This is also just our cat.
My kitty cat. Okay. Yeah. You're the Queen of Spain. Yeah. Isa's pretty chill. There's a bunch of people roaming around. She's like, whatever, I want to see what's up. So, yeah, I'll give you a hugging later. Probably sleep on my feet tonight. So don't bite me. And so having said that, what happens at Shiloh? Well, Grant gets his reinforcements there. Sun comes up, and Grant hits Beauregard like a ton of bricks, sweeps him off the field, pushes him all the way back to Corinth, captures Corinth, and keeps moving south. Huge victory. Nobody really gives a shit about Shiloh. No reporters there, no photographs, nothing like that. But it's a huge victory. It paves the way for Grant to attack Mississippi. It paves the way for the Union to capture the whole West. It sets Grant on the road to being a serious contender for the most successful commander in the Union Army. And by the way, the most bloody battle of the war up to that point, and yet nobody's really paying attention, right? So let's talk about. Hey, thank you. So let's talk about the East, right? after the Peninsular Campaign, or the 7 Days, which is what McClellan's bullshit is called. I think that's when the second Battle of Bull Run happens, but who cares? By September, Lincoln. Okay, by the summer, Lincoln is in the shit, right? He's got midterm congressional elections coming up in November 1862. The Confederates have this vague plan that maybe they're going to beat his ass in September, October, and cause him to lose a majority in Congress, and which will cause the support for the war to go away, right? At the same time, Lee is good on offense, not defense. Lee wants to invade shit. He doesn't want to be defending Richmond. So he goes to Davis and says, look, I beat McClellan like a drum. Give me command of the army, and I will attack like Washington. We'll capture Washington. We'll win the war. And Jefferson Davis figures it's always better to be killing the enemy on the enemy's home turf than yours. Plus, by the way, harvest time's coming up, and Lee points out he can feed the army with food in Maryland, not Virginia, right? Like, why feed our guys with Virginia farmers' food when we can take it from Maryland like at gunpoint or whatever, right? So Lee gets ready to invade the North. Lincoln knows this is coming, so he gets McClellan back and basically says, look, McClellan, you're my only hope, except you're not Obi-Wan, you're a dipshit. Like, you got to defend us. He gives McClellan everything. McClellan, by the way, whines like a little bitch that Lincoln is holding stuff back, and Lincoln is like, "You like fucking idiot! They're about to capture the Capitol. If there's a soldier, I would give it to you, right? Like, Congress demands he holds some guys back, and he does. But he's like, I give you everybody I can because, like, I don't want to lose the war, right? But McClellan is a whiny little bitch, right? And so at the same time, Lincoln has his cabinet. It's a big cabinet meeting where he says, look, I've been toying with this idea for a while, and I don't know if it's a good idea, but, like, what do you guys think? And he said, I'm not interested in hearing criticism of the idea, but just instead whether or not I should do it, like, now or later, or, like, what do you think? And the cabinet they're like, I don't know about this bullshit. We don't know. But Sumner makes a good point. He says, if you do it now, it's like a desperation move. If you do it after we win a battle, we seem like we're trying to, like, change the game, right? And so Lincoln, that's good advice, Lincoln says. So he tells McClellan, like, I really, 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 really fucking need you to win a battle. Like, it's for real. This is kind of this. So anyway, August 1862, Lee invades Maryland. McClellan is moving his army around Washington to kind of keep track of them. And actually, a group of Union soldiers find Lee's camp. They find the camp. Now, the Union soldiers have coffee from the Caribbean. Confederates don't have it because of the blockade. The Confederates have tobacco because of North Carolina and Virginia. The Union don't, right? So hey, girls, we need less talking. You just got to be a little more quiet for me. Yeah, I'm going to jack you up. All right. So having said that, the Union soldiers smoke what's called ersatz tobacco, which is basically like leaves in wrapping paper, which is some bullshit. The Confederates drink chicory, which is tree bark that they boil. And so, yeah, it's exactly that good, right? So if you ever get one of those trades on the battlefield where the Union Confederate guy like don't have guns, the trade is always you got coffee, I got tobacco, like we swap. And so the Union guys find a package of cigars, and the cigars they're gonna smoke that shit, but it's wrapped in some paper. So the sergeant's like, how the fuck this is? Sergeant gives a lieutenant gives a captain, captain's major, major's colonel gives the whatever, and it's Lee's battle plan, it's Special Order 121. And McClellan argues, okay, this is Lee's entire battle plan. It could be fake. Well, they authenticate it. One of his lieutenants, his personal assistants, they're called adjutants. He says, no, I know the guy that wrote it because he was my roommate at West Point, and I work for you, and he works for Lee, same job. And so it's actionable intelligence, right? And McClellan has double the number of men. He's on the defensive, on his home ground, with the battle plan. The battle is outside of the city of Sharpsburg, Maryland. The Union calls it the Battle of Antietam. It's a creek near the battle, right? This is it. The whole war rests on this battle. All right, and so I get some wine here because we're doing it. Drinks, yeah, drinks. Yeah.
There were random boxes of cigars wrapped in these.
It was what it was I guess Lee, you make a bunch of copies of the plan and then you send them to everybody because of course there's no email and whatever. You'd literally courier the plans to, and one of the higher ups had taken 3 cigars and wrapped the battle plans around the cigars as like a compliment to whoever subordinate he gave it to, right? And so just as like a thing to give somebody. And the Confederate had left it in the camp when they broke camp and left. And so the guys, the Union scouts found the Confederate camp, and they found the campfires, right? They found the discarded campfires, and they found a package. So they opened the package. It's wrapped up in paper, and it's the cigars, right? And then they opened it up, and they're like, "Well, this shit has some writing on it, right?" And that was the what are you looking for? Oh, are they being loud enough to be annoying and distracting?
I don't know,
Okay.
are they loud enough to be annoying and distracting? Yes.
In general, or
So anyway, this is the Battle of Antietam. It's September 1862. And so what happens is the Confederates are in the kind of the southwest, and the Union is in the sort of northeast. And what McClellan does, which is some bullshit, is instead of attacking all at once, he actually splits his army into thirds and attacks a third at a time. Right? He attacks northwest, they get their ass kicked, they fall back. Center, they get their ass kicked, they fall back. Southwest, they get their ass kicked, they fall back. If McClellan had attacked with all his men at once, Lee would have been overwhelmed. But what Lee does is he puts a bunch of his men behind the line as a floating reserve. Whenever the Union and the Confederate make contact, the floating reserve comes in and doubles the number of Confederate soldiers. So at Antietam, if you're a Union soldier, you have a 2-to-1 advantage on the battlefield. Yet whenever you fight a Confederate, they have a 2-to-1 advantage over you because McClellan sucks at his job.
I'm sorry, but you're making this sound like a D&D campaign.
This is the way it is. Yeah, and also at the early in the morning, it's Nicodemus Heights is the height. The Union doesn't attack Nicodemus Heights, despite the fact the Confederates have an undefended a battery up on the hill, which is today a farm, and I've been to the dude's farm. I want to say Stephen D. Lee is the artillery commander, and he keeps sending Lee's messages like, "I'm about to get my shit wrecked by these Union soldiers who are probably going to get tired of me blowing them up with cannons. Can you send me some reinforcements?" And Lee is like, "Nah, bro, you're fine." And it turns out that, in fact, McClellan never bothers to doing much about the battery in Nicodemus Heights. But you can go there today, and there's a dude who runs an actual dairy farm, and he will let you up on the hill where he occasionally turns up with the plow artillery shells in the dirt. Like if you just give him some, I don't know, like a case of beer or whatever, he'll let you walk around there, which I totally did one time. It was pretty cool. What happens in Antietam? Well, couple things. McClellan gets his ass kicked, but Lee loses so many men, he abandons his invasion of Maryland. So it's kind of a draw, I would say. Lee doesn't lose, but he decides to kind of pull the plug on the offensive. McClellan doesn't win, but he manages to not get defeated. On the other hand, Lincoln claims it as a victory, right? He goes to the papers and he's like, "Look, Lee invaded, we fought, he retreated. I sound like I win to me, right? Like it sounds like I win." And so he uses that as the propaganda victory he needs. At the same time, the casualties for Antietam is something like 12,000 men on both sides in a day. It is the single bloodiest day in American military history to the present day, to 2020, right? The photographers are there, and they are stunned. They take these pictures of just these fields of corpses. I mean, just guys, dead guys everywhere. More men died at Antietam than died in the American Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Civil War up to that point combined. Right? Every American that died before Antietam total is not as much as died in the single day of the Battle of Antietam. And we've never had a day, even D-Day, June 6, 1944, wasn't as bloody as Antietam. Even D-Day. Gettysburg was bloodier, but 3 days. Gettysburg was 72 hours of fighting. Antietam was like 8. Like 12. And so it was a shit show. I mean, it was unlike Shiloh, which was, not, like the 85% is bloody. Unlike Shiloh, there were photographers at Antietam, right? There were Matthew Brady was out there snapping, and it was new. Pictures were new. World War I would give you the instant camera where you would develop the pictures pretty quick. World War II even better. The Civil War, you still had to do the plates, the big, but you could still, the photographers would go to the battlefields and take pictures like the day the battle happened. and they would Matthew Brady would exhibit them in New York City or Washington D.C. in his studios, and people could see like 2 days later, 3 days later, this is what the battlefield looked like. The newspapers would print the pictures, and so I mean, it was nobody's, and like Vietnam was you got like TV, they had cameras recording the battles, what was happening, and the Civil War was the first big media event in terms of that kind of thing, right? McClellan's out. Lincoln fires him. Lincoln goes to McClellan's camp. There's an awesome picture of the meeting, and basically Lincoln says, "Look, I don't know a lot about this war bullshit, but Lee's army's retreating. Aren't you fucking going after them? They're in a river up to their necks. Isn't that a great time to be shooting at them?" And McClellan's like, "Oh, my army's taking a lot of casualties. Like, I don't really know what to." And Lincoln's like, "Fuck you, you're fired. Like, you're such a fucking idiot." And McClellan, by the way, is like, "I'll get you. I'll go into politics." He runs against Lincoln in 1864, which good luck with that, asshole. And so McClellan is bad at politics, bad at his job, bad at life. Anyway, I don't like the guy. Lincoln uses this, though, as an opportunity to announce this policy that he'd been toying with all summer long, the Emancipation Proclamation. He uses the victory at Antietam to announce that on January 1st, 1863, he intends to sign an executive order using the war powers granted to him by the Constitution to free all enslaved people in any state currently rebelling against the United States of America, which would be the Confederacy. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation is signed in January 1863. How many slaves does it free? 0, because the slave states that stayed loyal to the Union, right? Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, they are not in rebellion against the government, so Lincoln doesn't free any slaves in those states. Why not? If you free the slaves in those states, the states might flip to the Confederacy. So you just put this shit on the down low, right? You'll work on that shit later. On the other hand, it frees all the slaves in the Confederate states, except the U.S. government doesn't have any authority over those states, right? It's like me saying, I'm going to come to your house and take all your shit. Well, I don't have the power to do that unless I come in there with a gun, which is exactly what Lincoln is going to have to do in the Confederate States. But what the Emancipation Proclamation does is it transforms the Civil War from a war on the Union side to save the Union into a war which, if the Union wins, will mean the end of slavery. Wherever the Union Army is going to go, from January 1st, 1863 to April 15th, 1865, they're going to free the slaves as they go. Anywhere the Union Army marches, slavery will vanish. And so it's the most significant executive order in American history because it changes the entire meaning of the Civil War. And now the Confederates cannot say some bullshit like, we're just fighting to defend states' rights. No. Now, if I'm trying to free slaves and you're fighting me, you're fighting to preserve slavery. And of course, when the British, the Emancipation Proclamation, they suddenly developed grave reservations about sending redcoats over to help the Southerners, which would entail the defense of slavery, right? And so that is a thing, right?
Nobody can hear them.
Okay. Super annoying. Right. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. What's that?
I've tried 3 times.
No, I know. There's no stopping. They can only be hoped to be contained. Right. We don't have that kind of power. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, Olivia cares enough to fight back. Sarah just is like, what if I just pretend? Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay. And then I'll just do what I want. And it's like, that's real power when you can just be like, you know what? I don't even accept your authority. I'm not even going to bother to dispute you. I'm just going to do what I want. Yeah. Now they're quiet because we're making fun of them. They're going to see this shit when they're 18 and we tell them to a therapist. So anyway,
My father would get drunk and rattle on about American history.
well, he yelled at me for being loud in the front room when I was playing with LOL dolls. And so, yeah, sounds going on. So anyway, what can we say about Antietam? Well, McClellan's out, Emancipation Proclamation in. Lee is the real winner because even though he lost, like it was still an amazing, impressive display. With an army that was smaller than McClellan's, he managed to win the battle. Now, we put one of McClellan's subordinates in charge, Ambrose Burnside. Burnside has these rad mutton chops, which form a mustache, which is where we get the sideburns, right? We're learning things now. What, are you looking up a picture of Burnside?
Yeah.
It's for real. It's for real. It's a mutton chop that smoothly forms a mustache, right? Burnside protests to Lincoln and is like, bro, I'm not prepared for this. And Lincoln's like, look, it's you or it's a cardboard box with a face painted on it. And so he promotes Burnside. Burnside attacks the Confederates at Fredericksburg, Virginia in December 1862. I'm trying to get you to come here. Hey, come here. Hey, come here. I'm fine. I'm going to grab your ass. No, don't give me some sass. Okay, going upside down. We're doing it. We're doing it. Okay. And so you got sprinkles on your feet. And so, I mean, at this point, and so giving it up. And so Burnside gets his ass kicked at Fredericksburg. But what he does do, by the way, is liberate the town and free all the slaves. And there's a great story. There's a guy that works as a slave and to a hotel owner owns him. And the hotel owner skips town and gives him a bunch of cash and is like, pay everybody. And then, I don't know, or whatever, I'll be back. You're sweet. Okay, here you go. And the guy flees. He pays everybody and is like, I would leave town. Cat hair. He's like, I would leave town, and he does. And he gets across the river, and he ends up getting picked up by a patrol, Union soldiers, comes out of the river, freezing cold, wet, and it's December, and they like build a fire, and he's like, oh my God, he's gonna fucking kill me. And they're like, bro, didn't you hear? You're like free. We're freeing you. Like the slavery's over, right? Like this Emancipation Proclamation, right? And the black guy's like, I don't obviously get the news in the Union news. And they're like, yeah, Lincoln said the slaves are free or whatever. And so this black guy, I mean, that was how he got freed from slavery, right? He swam out of a river, and these sort of, there's some guys from some northern city freed him, picked him up and freed him. And he's like, he wrote a book about it in the 1890s. He retired. He's like in New York City. He wrote a book, and his kids published it. And it was like this memoir of his life. And he said, that's how I learned about the end of slavery, was these random Union soldiers picked me up. And he's like, I thought they were going to shoot me in the face. And instead they were like, no, we're in the business of freeing slaves, right? We're not capturing slaves, right? And so what happens? Let's go to 1863. We got a couple battles we're going to talk about in 1863. The first one is the Union invades Virginia again. It's under the command now. The Army's been put back together again. It's under the command of Fighting Joe Hooker. Fighting Joe Hooker, his nickname is Fighting Joe Hooker. That's a good sign, right? He allows so many civilians to follow his army that when they move, there's a whole crowd of like beer, like vendors and like fortune tellers and like laundry people and all this stuff that follow the army. They call it Hooker's Brigade. And there are so many prostitutes in Hooker's Brigade that the word hooker becomes slang for prostitute in the English language, which is another thing that we're learning today is about prostitutes, right? Drinks. Yeah, we're learning all kinds of fun words, right? All right, so Hooker goes down to Virginia. He goes to Chancellorsville. And he figures he's going to crush Lee. He's got a bigger army. Lee does something you're never supposed to do. Don't ever do this, right? You don't ever divide your army in the face of a numerically superior force. Okay, come here. Go to, if you need to go potty, like, run.
Okay.
All right, so kids are like, can I go pee? And it's like, like nobody's ever going to say no because you'll pee on the floor.
Like a real classroom.
Yeah, it is like a real classroom. I had people ask me, like in college, can I go to the bathroom? I'm like, well, I certainly don't want you to pee in the classroom, so probably you should just go.
Quietly.
Right? And I mean, like, and like you're just going to get up and leave and come back. It's fine. And so, having said that, there's a lot of noise for what's going on. But anyway, Lee divides his army in the face of a numerically superior foe. But you don't want to do that because what the enemy might do is realize you did it and crush your smaller chunks of your army one at a time, which is called defeating you in detail. Well, Lee does this shit anyway. He sends his number 2 man, his right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson, Thomas J. Jackson. Jackson's the former head of the Virginia Military Institute. He's a super devout Christian. He's a fundamentalist Christian. He's a crazy slave owner. He prays with his slaves and preaches to them about how slavery is ordained by the Old Testament and all this bullshit. He left VMI on the first day of the war, swore in the cadet class of the Confederate Army, joined it himself. At 2nd Manassas, he was urging his men to attack, and one of them said, look at this guy standing up there like a stone wall. Stonewall Jackson, the name stuck. Jackson's Valley campaign, where he kept a bigger Union army pinned down in the Shenandoah Valley for 8 months, is a masterpiece of army maneuver. So Jackson is now in charge of a third of Lee's army, and what happens is Hooker moves in and engages Lee, and Jackson takes a 32-mile flank march around the side, and he hits Hooker's army like a load of bricks and folds it up like a lampshade and crushes it. Hooker gets standing on the porch of a house he's using the headquarters. Artillery shell hits it, blows him on the ground, knocks him unconscious. He gets a concussion, and the army is just that's it. And so he retreats. Lee wins. Lee's greatest victory is Chancellorsville. It's like April 1862 or something like that, maybe March. And so Hooker's out. Hooker's fired. He's replaced by George Gordon Meade, who's the least interesting motherfucker you're ever going to see. But on the other hand, he's not a dipshit, which is important. Lee's never fought someone who wasn't a dipshit. He fought McClellan. He fought Pope, McClernand, McLaws. He fought Hooker. He fought Burnside. Meade is the first guy he's going to fight who is not good, but also not a total fucking dipshit, right? Which is huge. Lee advances north. Lee, again, doesn't want to be on the defensive, wants to be on the offensive, so he attacks, right? At the same time, U.S. Grant has been going down the Mississippi River. He hits Vicksburg. Vicksburg is like halfway up the Mississippi, west border of Mississippi on the Mississippi River. Today, there's not shit there except a battlefield and gambling, but they got riverboat casinos. In the 1860s, the richest city in America. They had all the cotton dealers and all this shit, slave auctions and shit. And so Vicksburg, what Vicksburg has is a chain they can raise to block the Mississippi River. You got to capture the ship. So Grant hits Jackson, Mississippi, and the defender is, I want to say it's Fighting Joe Jackson. And Jackson retreats and lets him have it. And there's this campaign where they go back and forth across the river east of Vicksburg, and basically Jackson just gives up ground to Grant. By early 1863, Grant is around Vicksburg. They've surrounded it. So built up on a series of bluffs that are all dirt from northern, like Montana, blown along the Mississippi River south, right? And so the Confederates fortify the city. Grant lays a siege. They come up with like 187 plans. Grant is writing to Lincoln every day. I'm going to try this shit. The next day, that shit failed. I'm going to try this different shit. The next day, that shit also failed. He digs a tunnel. Well, when you dig a tunnel 5 feet from the Mississippi River, you dig a swimming pool. He tries to divert the Mississippi River by building a canal, which is, you're laughing. That's exactly how stupid it is, right? So he's like, the canal didn't work. And it's like, of course the fucking canal didn't work. The Mississippi River is the biggest river in North America. You can't divert it with a canal. Fuck. And so finally Grant settles into an old school siege. You just surround the shitty, blow the shit out of it, starve them out. By April, yeah, I did. I'm drunk. It's fine. Shitty sushi. I love a Mongolian. I love a Mongolian. Drinks. I love a Mongolian. So Grant surrounds the city and just blows the shit out of it and starves them out. And there are rumors in Vicksburg that cats are gone, birds are gone, pigs are gone, horses are gone, dogs are gone, cats are gone, cows are gone, rabbits are gone. They're catching anything they can eat. There are rumors. There are people who got put in jail, executed for digging up graves in the cemetery, allegedly to eat. Right. Finally, on the 4th of July, 1863, the city surrenders. They can't feed him anymore. They don't have any ammo. Grant wins. And he sends a telegram to Lincoln. Lincoln gets it that day. He gets it. The miracle of wireless, or I should say wired telegraphy. Lincoln gets word that the same day that Grant takes the surrender, that Vicksburg is surrendered. He says, it is that most glorious day. It is the 4th of July, Independence Day. And he says, the father of waters, the Mississippi River, again flows unvexed to the sea. The Union Navy controls the Mississippi River from Cairo, it's called Cairo, Illinois, all the way down to Louisiana, to New Orleans, which they captured in 1862. New Orleans, remember, is a bowl built next to the river with a big wall. If you want to capture New Orleans, you get a dinghy and a stick of dynamite, and you roll it up to the levee, and you say, give me this city and blow a fucking hole in the wall with the dynamite. And if you do it, you'll flood the whole city. And so New Orleans is about as defensible as a balloon against the guy with a pellet gun. And so in like 1862, they surrender the city to the Union, and the Union occupies it. And so Vicksburg was the holdout. Grant gets it. And so this is it. The Union Army now has achieved one of its goals. Grant has achieved one of its goals. At the same time, Lee is fighting against the Union in Pennsylvania. Do we want to? Is it late enough to call? We want to keep going. Yeah, questions?
Yeah, there are not any questions, but Matt's question here is whether or not people want to keep going for like another half hour and finish the Civil War.
Oh hell no, in a half hour, no, nah, bro. We'll go as long as we go. I mean, if people are had enough, we'll have enough.
Do we want to call it and say we're going to do part 2 of the Civil War next week? Keeping in mind you said earlier in the promo, and the week after that we would do
It's Labor Day.
Reconstruction,
We're probably not
but it's
gonna
going to be
do-
Labor Day weekend. We probably won't be doing it that weekend.
Has the Battle of Shroot Farms happened yet?
No, it hasn't happened yet. Beats Bears, Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, so I guess at this point, any questions from the audience about things that
EDP
Hawk is upset that you're about to stop right on the cusp of Gettysburg.
I mean, do we want to?
Do we want to do Gettysburg and then?
I mean, yeah. Oh yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, I'm ready to do it. Let's do it. We're doing it. All right.
Okay.
Drinks.
Yeah, the thing is though is that I'm also really, really tired. So he's going to be passed out. I'm just going to be like, I'm exhausted. Olivia, put yourself to bed.
Yeah. Good luck.
Maybe I'll hang out.
I don't know about that. It was the first week where I had a bottle and a half. I didn't share it with you guys. It's awesome. She fell asleep.
You didn't share it with us. You were so nice.
All right, so let's talk about Gettysburg. Lee invades Maryland, and his plan is real simple. He doesn't want to hit the capital; it's defended, right? Instead, he figures if I move north, west of Washington D.C., the Union Army has to engage me, and I beat it, I win it, I crush it, and then I attack the capital. If they don't fight me, I just circle around it. I attack New York, Boston, Philadelphia, wherever the fuck I want. I go. And of course he knows that Meade, in command of the Army of the Potomac, cannot ignore the Confederate Army just like march and pass. Right? You got to fight it. Right. By the way, Gettysburg, the movie, is based on the book by Michael Shara. A, don't read the book; it's shit. B, don't watch the movie. The movie is okay. The opening narration where they have the maps and the colored lines and shit, that's the worst shit I've ever seen in my goddamn life. It's like as bad as a Mel Gibson movie. It's just really, they make up a bunch of shit, and it's like there's a whole thing about like Lee knows that a demand for surrender has been placed on Abraham Lincoln's desk. That's totally fake. Fuck that for us. That's not real. Right? If you want a good book about Gettysburg, Alan Gelzo wrote a really good one. He's a super chill dude. I got my parents got a signed book of his that he signed for me. He wrote a book called, I think it was The Last Battle, but it's Guelzo, Gelzo. And he wrote a really good book about Gettysburg a couple years ago. So it's pretty good. That's probably definitive. I think Gallagher wrote Trudeau. Noah Andre Trudeau wrote a really good one too. Actually. I just gotta say some shit about Jeff Shara, who wrote a really kind of Killer Angels was his book. They turned it into the movie Gettysburg. Not that great. So anyway, what can we say? Meade moves northeast and decides to try to fight Lee. They end up. I mean, that's not going to go well. Yeah, there was some taking of some iPads and some regulation is now happening. The Judge Dredd is bringing the law. So, I am the law. I am the law. Let's all have a moment to admit that Carl Urban was a much better Judge Dredd than Sylvester Stallone, which we can all agree on, right? And so, no, you got it. The new one is good. Carl Urban is just good, right? If you haven't seen The Boys, he's really good in that too. Lena Headey is the bad guy. Yeah. Which I was convinced for like 5 years that it was Lena Headey, but it's Lena Headey. We looked it up, but she plays the antagonist in the movie. It's a really good movie. Cersei Lannister, yeah, and Queen Gorgo of the Spartans in 300. Yeah, did you see 300? 300 is what if the Greeks made a propaganda movie about the Battle of Thermopylae and it was 300? That would be what it was. You want to see a bunch of shirtless guys jack up a bunch of Persians? That's your movie. It's pretty rad. Not gonna lie, it's very homoerotic because it's Greek. It's Greek. Ironically, he makes fun of the Athenians as boy lovers, and it's like, you're from Sparta, so like I don't know that I would be making fun of them for that. But it was not an accurate movie, but it was fun to watch people get impaled by spears for 2 hours. So anyway, it was not. It's not the Herodotus. So having said that, Gettysburg. Lee and Meade end up in the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, right? And the town is this little, medium-sized town, whatever. And south of it, there's a big set of farm fields, and there's two ridges that run north-south. There's Seminary Ridge with the Lutheran Theological Seminary on the west side of town, and there's Cemetery Ridge with a cemetery on the east side of town. Day 1, July 1st, 1863. The Union defends the town. Lee hits the town from the northwest. The Union, under Buford, cavalry commander, falls to the south of the town, and they take up positions on Cemetery Ridge. Lee takes up positions on Seminary Ridge, about a mile or so opposite the two ridges with big wheat fields in the center. Day 2 of the battle. Now, this is important. After the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson goes out on a scouting mission, rides out at night, right? He's coming back to the Union line. They think that he is a spy. There's a miscommunication. The sentry on duty sees a bunch of horses. He panics. He shoots. He hits Stonewall Jackson in the arm, right? Jackson, they put him in an infirmary. He gets sick. He gets an infection. They amputate at the elbow. They amputate at the shoulder. He gets an infection. It spreads. He dies. He goes before he dies. He goes up to a plantation called Guinea Station. It has a railhead to Richmond.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're having some technical difficulties. I tried to share a picture of the map of day 2 of Gettysburg, and it did not like that on my computer. So currently, you just have Matt on. Okay. I'm trying to get everything back. I know.
Audio's gone.
I'm trying to get everything back, but things are not
Oh my
good. Well,
God.
because your audio's on my computer.
Okay,
Your
it's
camera's
okay.
on
It's
my
fine.
phone. So it's fine. It's fine.
It's all fine. It's all fine. Everything's fine here. We're all fine here. The weapons malfunction. We lock it down. Boring conversation anyway. What? Is it cool?
Yeah.
All right. I'm just saying. All right. So so you're Gettysburg. It's day 2. Stonewall Jackson died, right? And Lee didn't go see him, and it's a real shitty thing that Lee did. He kept asking for Lee. When he died, Lee said Jackson in his death lost his left arm, but with his passing, I have lost my right. His new right-hand man, the new number 2 in the Army of Northern Virginia, is Old Pete, James Longstreet. Longstreet's got a big old beard. They call him Old Pete. I don't know what the fuck they call him that. He's not as good a commander as Jackson. He's not as aggressive. He doesn't have the working relationship with Lee that Jackson had, which is huge. So, I mean, maybe you could turn the volume down on the piano. I'm just saying. Okay.
Piano.
It's some app on that they have that you play the piano on. because it's like the iPad isn't annoying enough. They got to have a piano app. So yeah, it is because it's an app Olivia found on her tablet, and she showed it to Sarah, and Sarah was like, "I want it," and Sarah found it and downloaded it. Cause anyway, what's up? How you doing? So anyway, this is a big deal because Lee is not bringing his A game to Gettysburg. His army is not being run as efficiently as it had been in the past, right? So second day at Gettysburg, July 2nd, 1862. What happens? Lee launches flank attacks on the east and west flanks of the Union Army. He wants to hit them on the flank and roll them up. Now remember, you fight in the Union Army, in the Confederate Army, in ranks. Everybody lines up and you fire your rifle muskets. They're rifle muskets because you load them from the muzzle like a musket, but the interior of the rifle has the grooves that make the bullets spin and go farther, which is why they're called a rifle. If you know anyone with a gun, take the gun, unload the gun. Never put your finger in a loaded gun, but you can put your finger in the interior of the barrel of a gun and you can feel the grooves in the rifle. That groove is called rifling. It's why we call rifles rifles. It was developed in the 19th century. The Frenchman, I think his name is Claude, his name is Minet, I think his first name is Claude. He developed bullets that had grooves on them that would match up to the rifling like a screw being screwed into a nut. And when you fired the bullet would spin around its axis as it went. It made rifle muskets significantly more accurate than Revolutionary War muskets, but you still had to load them by standing them up and putting the gunpowder in and putting the bullet in and ram with a ramrod. They're not modern day breech loading weapons yet. Give me 6 months. So the trick is that if you attack an enemy, if you attack them at right angle, if your guys are all facing this way and they're all facing this way, all of your men can attack them, but only the end of their line can attack them. And if all of their men are standing in a line and they turn, they're looking at each other's backs, right? To turn, they have to actually rotate like that. It's very complicated to do that. So just go, yeah, thanks. And so under the table. Hey,
No,
girls,
don't sit under the table.
can you go literally anywhere else in the house right now? Thanks. Yeah, that did look like it hurt. It did look like it hurt a little bit. It did look like it hurt. So anyway, Lee tries to do this. You try to hit the enemy in the flank and you try to roll him up. He just collapses and you just sweep the army up. The Zulu do this in the 1870s against the British. They call it the teeth of the lion. You give the British something to shoot at, a couple Zulu guys, and then when the British engage and they're stuck in, you hit them in the flanks and you roll them up. Right? And they shit where the Zulu kill a bunch of British soldiers at Isla Nwanda in the 1870s, and they only have spears. They have cowhide shields and metal spears called aswegi, and the British have like bolt action Lee Enfield rifles. And so I mean, like, what are you doing? What Wakanda forever? I mean, it's not really Wakanda; it's the Zulu. So South Africa, they're really Bantu and stuff. But yeah, the Zulu they get it done at Isla Nwanda, and then later Rorke's Drift. And again, that's how effective the flank can be. So you're a British guy, you're shooting at these Zulu guys, and all of a sudden you turn and over the hill comes like 10,000 Zulus, and you just get jacked up. They stick 2 feet of metal in your chest, right? So that's what Lee tries to do on day 2. It doesn't work. The northern flank is a distraction. It's just a demonstration to keep you occupied. The southern flank is where it's at, and that's where the action is real. And on the very end of the southern flank, the Union Regiment from Maine, they actually defend the southern flank. They're the end of the Union line. On their left is nothing. And so they refuse the line. They extend their line half as long, and they turn it so the Alabama regiment that's attacking them cannot just flank them, just come around them. And these guys defended this hill at Gettysburg, Little Round Top. And famously, the legend is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in the 20th Maine saved the Union at Little Round Top on July 2nd, 1863. They actually ran out of ammunition, and they charged with bayonets down the hill to push the Confederates back. It worked. By the end of the day, the Confederates pulled back, and Lee was now in a terrible position. He had a big army. He had limited ammunition because the Confederates were not making a lot of ammo. The Union has all the factories, all the trains, all the banks, all the industry, all the stuff, which really mattered. Remember my boy Napoleon. Did we talk about Napoleon last week? 2 weeks ago? Yeah. Remember he said, God is on the side of the big battalions, right? It's a simplistic way to look at it that you win by bringing more shit, But a basically good military strategy is get there first with more shit, and you probably win. And so Lee does not have enough shit. He doesn't have enough food, ammo, clothes, boots, shoes, hats, jackets, blankets, whatever. The Union has more of this. They're making more. The Union Army is backed up by a bigger country with a bigger populace and a bigger army and a bigger economy, right? So Lee's in a tough position. You back away, you lose. You attack, you might lose. But he's reckless. He's aggressive. What else is he going to do? So on July 3rd, 1863, the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg, he orders a frontal attack across his entire front. He orders all of his men in the center of his line to form up in ranks and march across the battlefield and hit the Union front on. At Gettysburg, not Gettysburg, at Fredericksburg, the Union did this to him and they got their ass kicked. So Lee figures maybe it'll be different for him. His men are better. His men are tougher. He's a mistake Lee makes. His men are not. They're not better soldiers. They have better commanders, maybe. But Lee, I think, is captivated by his own mythology. He never loses a battle. He won Fredericksburg. He won 6 of the 7 days. He won, he won Chancellorsville. He won this. He won that. And so the attack comes to be known as Pickett's Charge. It's named for George Pickett, who is the commander of a Virginia regiment that attacks in the charge. They call it Pickett's Charge. Lee doesn't have enough artillery to cover the whole thing. So the artillery comes out and shells the Union, keeps them down for like half of it. The Confederate guns fall silent, and the Union guns open up on these guys as they advance. It's July 1863, Wheatfield, Pennsylvania, 100 degrees. Wool uniforms, the Confederate soldiers are exhausted. When they reach the other side, they form up in ranks, and they fire volleys into the Union, who are hiding behind a stone wall they built, just like the Confederates had at Fredericksburg. When the Union soldiers get hit with the volley, they stand up and fire back at the Confederates. It's devastating. The Union cannons fire canister shot like Napoleon did in the Vendemiaire when he killed all the rioters and became the darling of the Directory. They fire these coffee cans full of nails that annihilate Confederate regiments. The Confederacy, when they go east across the battlefield, they start retreating immediately. They start suffering bad casualties. Lee, you can't see what's going on. The gunpowder is black powder, is thick smoke. You can't see what's going on. You start to get a sense that guys are retreating and people are dragging wounded people away. There's a road that runs about 3/4 of the way across the Confederate advance. It's what is it? It's the I forget the name of it. I can remember it later. Any Confederate soldier that crosses that road is either killed, captured, or wounded. No exceptions. Most of the Confederates don't make it across the road because the fire is too intense. A group of Confederates do capture a little angle of the Union line, and they get pushed back with severe casualties. So when the smoke clears on the third day at Gettysburg, Lee has suffered unimaginable casualties. His army has suffered badly. The Union has not broken. They have not done anything spectacular, but think of a boxer going up against Mike Tyson. And he gets in the ring, and Mike Tyson punches him for an entire 5 rounds, and the boxer just takes it, just blocks and takes it. And when the bell rings, he hadn't done anything fancy, but he survived 5 rounds against the best boxer in the business, and he didn't get knocked out, and he didn't give up a punch, and he didn't give up a defeat. That in itself is impressive. And so Meade didn't make any mistakes. He didn't do anything flashy, but he didn't make a mistake. He didn't fold like a wet rag. And so when the sun goes down, famously, Lee goes to George Pickett, and he sees Pickett, and he says, General Pickett, form your men up to prepare to repel a Union attack. And Pickett says, my men? And Lee says, your division. Where is your division? And Pickett says, my division, sir? I have no division, for they are all dead. All of his men crossed the Hagerstown Road, and they got shot by the Union soldiers. And when the sun goes down on the third day at Gettysburg, 23,000 soldiers have been killed or wounded. It's the bloodiest battle of the Civil War up to that point. 3 days, 20,000. 10 times the number of people living in the town of Gettysburg, right? And so Lee retreats on day 4, July 4th, 1863. The same day the Confederates surrender at Vicksburg. Lee retreats. Why? There's nothing he can do. He can't beat Meade. Meade's getting reinforcements every day. Lee's getting shit, right? So Lee retreats, and Meade is able to send a messenger by horse on July 4th, the morning. And the messenger travels from Gettysburg to Washington. And right around the time that Lincoln gets a telegram from Mississippi, from Richmond, he gets a horse messenger from Gettysburg who says, late last night I was dispatched, and the Confederates appear to have lost a major battle against the Army of the Potomac in Virginia, or in Pennsylvania. And so Lincoln is able to say on the 4th of July, 1863, the tide has turned. We defeated a major Confederate army by Lee in Pennsylvania. We defeated a major Confederate army in Vicksburg, Mississippi. We won both battles. We won one of them today. We won one of them yesterday. And it's Independence Day, 1863, right? And so Lee retreats. By the way, fun story. Lee had limited intelligence at Gettysburg. His cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart wasn't there. Where was Jeb Stuart? Jeb Stuart went on a cavalry raid. He got himself in the Northern papers. He scared the shit out of every Northerner in an arc all the way around Gettysburg to Washington to Baltimore and back by raiding all these Union towns. He got within sight of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. and turned around. Why did he turn around? They were capturing and looting stuff. They had so much loot, they had to turn around and go home. What was the loot that they had? It was free Northern blacks that they captured and they put in chains and they enslaved, and they were going to take back to the South and sell for cash. And so Jeb Stuart got his eyes on making money enslaving black people, and therefore he wasn't available to give Lee intelligence about the disposition of the Union Army at Gettysburg. One of the reasons Lee lost. By the way, if it's not about slavery, why the fuck was Jeb Stuart so excited about enslaving free black people? It wasn't about slavery, right? Why would Jeb Stuart ride away from his responsibilities unless he knew he could make tens of thousands of dollars selling black people into slaves by capturing free Northern blacks and selling them into slavery in the South during the war? And so Lee loses Gettysburg. The photographers come. No one's ever seen anything like this. There are dead bodies as far as the eye can see. It takes them months to bury the bodies at Gettysburg, right? And Lincoln goes to Gettysburg later that year to dedicate a cemetery to the Union soldiers that have died. The Union Army policy is they try to identify all the Union soldiers and they just bury the Confederates in a mass grave. Fuck those guys. And so they get the cemetery dedication speech. Pennsylvania Governor Edward Everett speaks for like 2 hours, and it's this bullshit speech. I don't give a fuck about this. And so Lincoln coming out of the train was talking with his secretaries, Nicolay and Hay are his two secretaries. And in the White House, Lincoln would sometimes not be able to sleep at night, and he would come into Nicolay and Hay's bedrooms and talk with them to try to sort of talk over stuff. And Nicolay said when it was cold, Lincoln would get in bed next to them and get under the covers and talk to them all night long because he was worried so much about this battle or that battle of the army or whatever. And when Lincoln was assassinated, Hay took all of Lincoln's papers and donated them to the John Hay Library at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, which is where they are today, which was illegal, but Hay didn't give a shit. And also, if you go to the John Hay Library, they have the biggest collection of Lincoln memorabilia other than the Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois. And they have, and I'm not kidding, they have a lock of Abraham Lincoln's hair under glass in Providence, Rhode Island, which is fucked up, but also is cool as shit. And so Lincoln goes to Gettysburg. He's nervous. He writes a speech on a piece of paper. He says, "It's." Could you for real not make any noise? Like, can you just be quiet a little bit? That's just gonna fall again. There it goes. Yeah, put it on the floor. Yeah, she just put it back, and it was like sliding directly. There it goes. Boom. So anyway, Lincoln goes to this thing, and he listens to Edward Everett, the governor of Pennsylvania, speak for 4 hours. No one gives a shit. And he goes up, and he gives a speech. It's like 250 words. It's like 2 minutes. The photographer takes a smoke break because he figured if the governor of Pennsylvania spoke for 2 hours, the president's going to speak for like 5. And so he realizes at the last minute that Lincoln actually gave his speech because people are like clapping confusedly. Like, is he done talking, I guess? And so he quickly snaps a blurry photograph of Lincoln moving through the crowd, which is the only photograph we have of Lincoln delivering the Gettysburg Address, which is the speech that he gives. And what Lincoln does with the Gettysburg Address is he links the Republican Party's ideas to the Constitution and the sacrifices of the Union soldiers. He argues that the Republican Party had been fighting in the 1850s against the idea of an aristocratic United States dominated by the Southerners who own these plantations and have this oligarchic aristocratic style of society where a small number of wealthy, influential people dominate the United States. That was the way that the southern states were run. The wealthy landowners owned all the land, all the slaves, and dominated this society. Olivia, if you don't go in that direction with that thing, I will throw it in the fucking lake. Thank you. And so this was advocated by none other than James Henry Hammond. You might remember him from that one time he bought a slave, had sex with the slave, had a daughter with the slave, and then had sex with the daughter. South Carolina senator.
Remember that guy?
You remember that guy? You maybe might have been asleep when James Henry Hammond committed incest and child sex assault. And so Hammond gave a speech in the Senate where he argued that when you built a house, you built these pillars that you put the foundation on called the mud sill. And the mud sill was where all the dirt and the mud collected so it wouldn't get in the house. And he said, just like a house has to have a mud sill, pillars that uphold the foundation, society has to have that too. There has to be a top in society and a middle and a bottom. And basically the bottom gets shit on, but has to hold up the rest of society. And most people are in the mud sill. They're stupid, they're poor, they're dumb, and they don't give a shit about them. And so the Republicans didn't like that. They didn't accept that. They thought that that's not a way to have a society. You have to have a society that includes everybody, right? That includes poor people, it includes working people, and some Republicans, like Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, thought it has to include black people too. And so Lincoln at Gettysburg argued at the vision of the founding fathers of a society where government was by the people, for the people, and of the people, could only exist if you erased the threat to liberty that slavery represented. The Southerners, by owning slaves, the very existence of slavery and the kind of society that you had to have slavery was a threat to the Republican idea of an egalitarian democracy. And so Lincoln argued that was the point of the whole Civil War. He said, we cannot honor this battlefield any more than the men who fought here have already done. They've given what he said their last full measure they've laid their last full measure on the altar of liberty. Right? And Lincoln said, the world is not going to remember what we said here. It's going to remember what they did here. But what Lincoln says, what they did here, what those men died for, was to make the promise of the founding fathers real by eradicating the institution of slavery. And so the Republican Party's opposition to slavery is actually the fulfillment of the vision of the founding fathers. It was a huge speech. Lincoln thought it was a shitty speech. He got on the train with Hay, and he was like, yeah, that speech sucked. And Hay was like, that was the best thing anyone ever said. Like, you think it sucked? That was better than, I don't know, the Bible. Like, people are going to quote that shit forever. And we still do. There was a period of time in American history where most people memorized it. Most people had to have it memorized. 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth in this great nation a new nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. People memorized that because it was good and it was short and there's no better way to express an idea in a small speech than Lincoln did. But Lincoln argued that what the Republicans were fighting for was actually what the United States of America was all about. And what the Southerners were fighting for was a rejection of those ideas. Not that all men are created equal, but that some men, the rich guys, the landowners, the slave owners, would call the shots, and everybody else would shut the hell up. Poor white people, black people, slaves, everybody. It's a big deal, right? We should mention, if you're interested in this, there's a great historian, Heather Cox Richardson. She's written a bunch of books about this. And she lies awake at night thinking about this and writes a bunch of books about it. And she's written some good ones, right? And so, having said that, Lincoln sort of summed up what Gettysburg was about, right? So anyway, after that, the war is over. We won. We won that shit. It's over. Well, not really. Not really. Right? You have another year and a half. You have another 2 years of war from the summer of 1863 to the spring of 1865. So I'm pretty drunk. It's a fucking chaos in the house, and it is now 9 o'clock. So next week we will talk about the end of the Civil War. and maybe Reconstruction too, because we need to talk about that. It's important, and it's probably the most undercovered part of American history. So, as always, like and subscribe to our page. I appreciate everybody who does that. Comment with questions, comments, concerns, ideas, issues, things you want me to talk about. I know, like I said, Sean a couple weeks ago hit up about the Battle of Stalingrad. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Witch's Cauldron. We're going to talk about the Univermag department store, and we're going to talk about the Sixth Army and Friedrich von Paloy, because we got to talk about that. And then somebody asked me to talk about shit. Stephanie asked me to talk about something a couple days ago, and I forgot what it was, but it's saved somewhere. So we will come back to all your topics, because I appreciate everybody has interesting stuff that you want to hear about. I want to tell you about if I can, right? So are there any questions before we go? Because before we do it.
There's not a question yet, but remember you're on a lag, so let's
Okay, let's give it a second.
Him and Haw here for a second while people have a chance to decide if they have any final questions about the. Hawk wants you to talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
We're going to talk about Teddy Roosevelt, my boy Teddy. We're going to start in 1865 when Teddy takes his second cousin and shoves her in a closet. Her name is Edith Caro, and he shoves her in a closet because she's crying at Lincoln's funeral because she's a weak woman. And then years later, they get married, and they have what she calls her white hot hour, where she seduces him. And we're going to talk about Teddy Roosevelt, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He is the what's that? No, he's the legit Assistant Secretary, but he pretends to be the legit Secretary of the Navy, which is totally illegal. Which is also why we own the Philippines now. And then he becomes police commissioner of the city of New York. We'll talk earlier. He's police commissioner, and he becomes the governor of New York City, vice president, president. We were talking about Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt will jack you up if you mess with Teddy Roosevelt. He kicks ass. He is also a little bit racist, although not all the way racist. Because, for example, he thinks differently about black people, but brown people is different than that. And he's also kind of an interesting guy. He got shot one time and didn't give a shit about it because he's Jackson, the guy shot him and missed, and Jackson beat the fuck out of him. Roosevelt was giving a speech, and the guy shot him and it actually hit him and wounded him, and he just put his hand over it and gave the rest of his speech and was like, "I'm fine, whatever," because he's a badass. Yeah, Rough Riders, baby. We're gonna go kill some Mexicans or kill some Spanish guys in Cuba. And we're going to be called the Rough Riders because that kicks ass. That's what it does. He volunteered to lead troops after being president in 1914 on the Western Front because he's a wild man. So we'll talk about Teddy Roosevelt. How can you not talk about Teddy Roosevelt is what I want to know.
And then also, Sarah wonders if we can do Salem for Halloween. You and I think know about the same amount about.
You know probably more than I do but we could do that. We could. Yeah, we could maybe.
I can teach about Salem, but it involves making muffins. So
you can help me out with Salem. We can maybe. Oh shit. We can maybe talk about Salem and witchcraft for Halloween because that's thematically appropriate. Yeah.
Other than that, no, it does not appear that there's too many questions right now. Though Chrissy's favorite quote apparently was also my favorite quote from last week was "Everyone's a son of a bitch."
Everybody, like a lot of people are not everybody's a son of a bitch. I don't think Alexander Hamilton is a son of a bitch, and people who don't like Alexander Hamilton,
no, but he's a legitimate bastard.
They can kiss my ass. Right, but his mom's not a bitch. That's rude. That's rude. Abraham Lincoln is also not a son of a bitch, and I won't tolerate that in this house. We don't talk about Lincoln in a bad way. That's like. You're running out of people that are not son of a bitches in history that you can uncritically admire. William Lloyd Garrison, the abolitionist, I uncritically admire him, and like Frederick Douglass. That's about it, really. Most people are son of a bitches. Yeah, that's accurate.
Are you aware of the fact that Frederick Douglass, he went to Europe for a while? I think he was in England for a while, and he actually married a white woman.
It's not illegal in England. Who cares? Whatever. It's illegal in Maryland.
I don't know that too many Americans know that part about Frederick.
He was a crazy guy. He liked photography because he didn't want white people to draw him. He wanted to have his image the way it was. So he was a big advocate of photography because he said, I want people to see what I look like, not what white people think I should look like. And so they called him the most photographed man in America in the 19th century.
There are a ridiculously large number of photographs of
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass throughout his entire lifespan.
Yeah, that's why, because he thought photography was a big deal. You could control how you looked, and it wouldn't be a guy drawing a portrait of you that would be filtered through his preconceptions. The camera just shows what it shows.
Also, if you have not ever looked up a picture of young Frederick Douglass, I absolutely recommend it.
Why is that?
He is a good-looking young man.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I think we are. Everyone is a SOB in the light of 2020. I agree, Sarah.
I mean, like in 20. Well, I mean, everybody's an SOB. Yeah, I mean, like it's hard because you don't want to judge people in the modern. I mean, that's a huge argument in history. Should you judge people according to today's standards? It's hard. Can you take Julius Caesar and compare him to like now and judge? I mean, I don't know. On the other hand, you look at a guy like Andrew Johnson or Andrew Jackson, and you can say, like, I mean, clearly at the time he was pretty racist. Not everybody felt the way that he did, right? I mean, not everybody felt that, clearly Julius Caesar grew up in a society that was vastly different from our own. Whereas Andrew Jackson grew up in a government that was run by the same document that we have now. It's our government. So, I mean, you can be a little harsher on people like that, right? Woodrow Wilson was born in the same century I was born in, right? So you can be a little harsher, I think. But yeah, I mean, that's the enduring question. How relevant is it to judge people according to our moral standards versus how relevant is it to maybe say that it's not so appropriate to do that? I don't know. That's a big fight. That's a whole 2-hour video we got to have later, I guess.
I suppose one of these nights we can have a topic on the ethics of history.
Yeah, I mean, that's a. I don't know if I can get that drunk when we do that because that's complicated. So. I mean, that might have to be Professor Matt just to get that drunk because that shit is real.
Professor Matt is surprisingly sober.
Professor Matt gets a little sober to talk about ethics and historiography and the meaning of history and like, but yeah. Anyway, appreciate everybody liking, commenting, subscribing. Thank you to our fans. As always, find our Facebook page. I think we're on Instagram. We're on Instagram. And YouTube. Comment if you've got questions, if you've got topics you want to talk about. Comment. We'll try to answer them. We'll try to cover your topics. And so we appreciate it very much.